Welcome to Noir Street, a channel where every story carries a mystery or something even darker. Our community may be small, so please subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like and tell us in the comments which part of the world you're watching from. Now let's begin the story. Chapter 1. The Knock Before Snowfall, Christmas Eve in New York, has two faces: shop, window cheer that fights for attention, and the hard, practical cold that wins anyway. I had just finished telling Fritz that no, I did not want a second helping of anything, not even if he swore it would keep my toes from freezing. When the doorbell rang, it was not the jolly, uncertain ring of a stranger who had taken the wrong brownstone, or the brisk ring of a delivery boy with a red nose and a short temper. It was a ring with intention behind it. Two quick pushes, a pause, then one long one, like someone who had practiced being heard without sounding panicky. From my office chair, I glanced at the clock on the wall, 10 minutes past 6. Wolfe would be upstairs in the plant rooms, finishing his inspection of the orchids before the evening's dinner. He would also be in a mood that should have come with a sign and a warning bell of its own. Christmas Eve disrupted schedules, and schedules were Wolfe's religion. "Answer it, Archie," Fritz called from the kitchen doorway, his voice calm and, as always, reasonable. He has a gift, seemingly harmless, for sounding like the man in charge without ever seeming to claim it. "I'm the only one here with hands that are not sacred," I said, and went to the front hall. When I opened the door, the cold tried to come in with the visitor. It was not the cold itself that made me shift my weight. It was the look on the man's face. There are 100 kinds of shaken. This one was the kind that has already pictured the disaster and is now trying not to blink it back into reality. He was in his late 30s, maybe 40, with hair too carefully combed for a man in trouble, like he had put that part of himself in order because everything else was collapsing. His overcoat was good wool, expensive but worn at the cuffs, and his scarf was tied with the exactness of a man who believes in knots. His hands were bare and red. "Mr. Goodwin?" he asked. His voice had a dry rasp to it, like he had been talking to himself for hours. "That depends," I said. "If you're selling anything, I'm out of money and patience." He swallowed. "I need Mr. Wolfe." "Most people do," I said. "Come in before you turn into a statue, name." He stepped inside, removed his hat with care, and looked past me as though expecting the house to contain a trap. "Caleb Rook, I—" He stopped, as if the next words had thorns. "Caleb Rook," I repeated. "All right, Mr. Rook, hang your coat there. Wipe your shoes. The rug didn't do anything to you." He obeyed, which was something. Men who don't obey small instructions in the first 30 seconds tend to make larger problems later. I led him to Wolfe's office. The lamps made pools of soft light that did not quite defeat the grey outside the windows. The room smelled the way it always does: books and leather, and a faint trace of cigar smoke, even when Wolfe isn't smoking, as if the walls have adopted it as a permanent opinion. I motioned to the red leather chair. "Sit, Mr. Wolfe is upstairs. Give me the opening remarks. If they're dull, I'll send you back out into the cold as a mercy." He sat on the edge of the chair, not trusting it to support him or himself. His eyes roamed the room and landed on the desk. The globe, the yellow pad and pencil set precisely where I left them. His gaze flicked to the safe, to the door, to the window, as if he were counting exits. "I'm not here to confess," he said suddenly. "Good," I said. "Confession is a messy habit, and the city has offices for it. I'm here," he said, and his throat worked again, "because I know a man will be murdered tonight." That earned him my full attention. I did not move, but inside my head something sat up. "Planned," he added. "Set before midnight." I waited a beat. The best way to handle a dramatic statement is to give it enough silence to either sag or hold its shape. His held. "All right," I said. "That's a fine start. Now give it a body. Who, where, and how do you know?" He pressed his palms against his knees, as if he needed to anchor himself. "The man's name is Guy Varn. He owns a shipping company, Varn Coastal, offices on West Street. He'll be at the Caswell building tonight. in the 7th floor suite belonging to Leland Sire. Never heard of him, I said. You're fortunate, he said, and a bitter edge slipped into his voice. It vanished as quickly as it came. Sire is a financier. He hosts a Christmas Eve gathering every year. People come to drink and be seen. This year Vaughn will be there. And he'll be murdered, I said. How? Poison, knife. Pushed into the elevator shaft. New York is creative. Rook's eyes tightened. Shot, he said. There will be a gun. It will happen after 11. That's specific, I said. So you either have a vivid imagination or you've been handed a script. Which is it? He hesitated, then reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it like it might burn him if he gripped it too firmly. I received this, he said, this afternoon, at my office. He handed it to me. It was a note, typed on plain paper, no letterhead. The words were brief and arranged with the neatness of a man who likes order even in violence. At 11:15 tonight, Guy Vaughn will be dead. He will be shot in Leland Sire's suite in the Caswell building. You will be there. You will do nothing. If you interfere, you will lose what you value most. No signature. I read it twice. There are notes that shout, this one whispered, and that was worse. What do you value most? I asked lightly, because if you don't keep your voice light at moments like that, you start sounding like a man who has been hit. Rook did not smile. My wife. All right, I said. You're married. Is your wife with you? No, he said quickly. She's at her sister's in Brooklyn. She went there yesterday. She will be there until tomorrow. And you received this note today, I said. It claims you'll be at the Caswell building. Are you planning to go? I was invited, he said. I attend every year. It would be noticed if I didn't. That's a weak reason, I said. But fear makes weak reasons sound like steel. Who sent the note? That's why I'm here, he said. I don't know. I know only. He broke off and rubbed a hand across his face, hard, like he was trying to wipe away an image. Only that it's not a prank, it's not a bluff. How do you know? I asked. He looked at me and his eyes were suddenly very clear. Because the same person has been testing me for weeks, he said. Small things at first. Messages, calls with no voice on the other end. A package containing a photograph of my wife leaving our building, taken from across the street, close enough to show the pattern of her scarf. Lovely, I said. And you didn't go to the police? He shook his head. I'm not proud of it, but the messages, they implied they knew things about me. About things that would ruin my wife if they came out. Not her fault. Mine. His jaw tightened. And then today this note. I set the note on Wolfe's desk. All right, I said. You've purchased yourself a problem. Now you want Mr. Wolfe to solve it before midnight. Yes, he said. The word came out like a plea he hated making. You realize it's Christmas Eve, I said. He stared. That's why it's happening tonight. I nodded slowly. That made a nasty kind of sense. Christmas Eve gives people excuses for being out late, for being in odd places, for drinking too much, for not noticing the wrong thing until morning. I stood and went to the hall and rang the bell for Wolfe, which is the polite way of summoning him without climbing the stairs to his plant rooms and risking Fritz's disapproval. Fritz appeared, as if he had been waiting behind the door. Archie, he asked, eyebrows slightly raised. Tell Mr. Wolfe we've got a man downstairs who says someone is scheduled to be murdered before midnight, I said. Also tell him it involves money, threats, and a note. Use whatever words make it sound like it might be interesting. Fritz's mouth tightened in the way it does when he is thinking about schedules being disturbed. But he nodded and moved toward the stairs. I returned to the office and found Rook staring at the door, as if expecting his threat to walk in wearing a Santa hat. While we wait, I said, taking my seat behind my desk. You can help yourself by being useful. Why would someone want Guy Vaughn dead? Rook's laugh was short and humorless. Because he's Guy Vaughn, that's not a motive. That's a slogan, I said. He's ruthless, Rook said. He breaks companies. People. He's been buying shipping contracts by making sure competitors can't fulfill theirs. He has friends in places where he shouldn't. He has enemies everywhere. And your connection? I asked. Rook hesitated again. I work for Leland Sayi, he said finally. That's a connection, I said. What do you do? I handle acquisitions, he said. Meaning you make other people miserable for a living, I said. His eyes flashed, then dimmed. Sometimes, he admitted. So, you'll be at Sai's suite tonight. Vaughn will be there. Somebody wants Vaughn dead and wants you present and passive, I said. That suggests either you're the intended fall guy or you're the intended witness, or both. Rook's throat worked. I can't be the fall guy, he said quickly. I didn't, I wouldn't, I'm not accusing, I said. I'm arranging possibilities. Is there any reason someone would want you blamed? He stared at the carpet. I was involved in a deal with Vaughn, he said. One that went badly. What kind of deal? Rook's eyes lifted, and for the first time, there was something like defiance in them. The kind you don't discuss with a man you just met, he said. I grinned. You're in the right house, then. Mr. Wolfe charges extra for dignity. Footsteps sounded on the stairs, heavy and measured, and a moment later, Nero Wolfe entered the office. If you've never seen Wolfe come into a room, it's hard to explain the effect. He does not hurry, but he also does not drift. He occupies space with certainty, as if the air has to rearrange itself to accommodate him. His face was composed, but his eyes were narrowed in that way that means he is already annoyed and is deciding whether to forgive. He looked at Rook. He looked at the note on his desk. He looked at me. Archie, he said, it is Christmas Eve. I know, I said. The calendar insisted. Wolfe moved to his chair and sat, settling into it like a judge taking the bench. Mr. Caleb Rook, the visitor said, rising halfway. Then, thinking better of it and sitting again, Wolfe inclined his head a fraction. Mr. Rook, my assistant says you predict a murder. Rook's hands clenched. Not predict, he said. No. Wolfe's eyelids lowered slightly. An interesting claim, he said. How do you know? Rook nodded toward the note. That. Wolfe picked it up. Read it, and read it again. He did not change expression, but I have lived with him long enough to notice the smallest shifts. His eyes sharpened at the line about losing what one values most. He placed the note back on the desk with care. This is coercion, he said. It is also, possibly, an attempt to recruit you to silence. You have come to me. That implies you prefer danger to complicity. Rook swallowed. Yes, he said. I can't sit and watch a man die. Perhaps you can, Wolfe said mildly. Many do, but you have chosen otherwise. That is at least tolerable. Rook's mouth tightened at the insult, but he did not protest. Fear makes men accept things they would otherwise fight. Tell me, he said. Why should I believe this note is genuine? Rook leaned forward, urgency breaking through his careful restraint. Because of the photograph, he said. Because of the calls. Because of the way the messages described my movements. They knew when I left my building, what I bought, what I ate. They knew things no one should know. Wolfe's eyes flicked to me. Archie, he said, did you verify any of this? Not yet, I said. I was waiting for you to donate your wisdom. Wolfe ignored the remark as if it were a fly landing on an elephant. Mr. Rook, he said, you work for Leland Sayi. You will be at his suite tonight. Is Mr. Sayi aware of this note? Rook shook his head quickly. Number if he knew. If he knew what? Wolfe prompted. Rook hesitated, then said, he would handle it his own way. Wolfe's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. A financier's own way can include many unattractive options, he said. Very well. Who else will be present in this suite? Rook blinked, caught by the practical question. Several people, he said. Sayi's circle. His assistant, Diana Pell, his attorney, Horace Brill, 2 clients from out of town, and Guy Vaughn. And you, Wolfe said, others. There will be staff, Rook said. A bartender, maybe a caterer, security in the building. Wolfe nodded slowly, as if arranging them on a chessboard. You received this note today. Was it delivered by mail? No, Rook said. It was on my desk when I returned from lunch. Meaning someone entered your office, Wolfe said. Rook's face tightened. Yes, your office has a secretary, a receptionist. Yes, Rook said. But she was out, and the door. He stopped. The door was locked. Wolfe's eyebrows rose a fraction. Then someone with a key, he said. Or someone with skill. That's why it's real, he said. They can reach me. Wolfe leaned back. It is indeed persuasive, he said. Now we consider the central difficulty. If the murder is planned for after 11, we have less than 5 hours. I cannot, as a rule, approve of haste. It leads to errors, yet time is the one commodity you cannot purchase. That's why I came, Rook said. You're the only man I know who could. Wolfe lifted a hand. Spare me, he said. Archie, what is the weather? I glanced toward the window. The sky had that look it gets when it is deciding to turn ugly. Cold, I said, and the air has the scent of snow thinking about showing up. Snow, Wolfe said, as if tasting the word and disliking it. Christmas Eve, impending violence and snow. How theatrical. Rook started to speak, but Wolfe held up a finger again. Mr. Rook, Wolfe said, there is an obvious step you have avoided. You could simply not attend this gathering. Rook's face went rigid. And if they think I interfered, interference includes absence, Wolfe said. Yes, that is your fear, yet your wife is not with you. If the threat is immediate, we may secure her. Rook's eyes widened. You can. Wolfe turned his head slightly toward me. Archie, he said, find out where Mrs. Rook is. Now, I said, unless you believe midnight will wait. Wolfe replied. I got up. All right, I said. Mr. Rook, give me the address in Brooklyn and a telephone number, and give it fast. Rook rattled it off. An address in Bay Ridge, a phone number, his wife's sister's name. His voice steadied while he recited facts. Facts are handrails for a man on stairs. I went to the desk phone and dialed. It rang 3 times before a woman answered. Hello, this is Archie Goodwin, I said. Is Mrs. Rook there? A pause. Then, Caleb, is that you? No, I said. But I'm with him. Is she there? Another pause, longer this time. Then, she went out an hour ago. My spine tightened. Went out where? She said. She needed wrapping paper, the woman said. I cut in. Did she take a coat? Did she say when she'd be back? Yes, the woman said, voice turning anxious. She should be back by now. I looked at Wolfe. He was watching me, his eyes now fully alert. Listen, I said into the phone. What's your name? Marjorie, she said. Marjorie, I said. You're going to do exactly what I tell you. Lock your door, don't open it for anyone. Not for neighbors, not for Christmas cheer, not for a man claiming to be a delivery. If someone knocks, you call the police, understand? Why? She demanded, and fear sharpened the word. Because it's a bad night for trust, I said. Now give me the nearest corner and the name of the store she went to for wrapping paper. She gave it to me, voice trembling now. I hung up and turned to Rook. His face had drained of color. My wife, he whispered. Wolfe's voice was steady, unhurried. Archie, he said, go. I hesitated only long enough to let the shape of the problem settle. The note promised murder and threatened the thing Rook valued most. And now the wife had conveniently stepped out into the cold on Christmas Eve. That was leverage. All right, I said. I grabbed my coat from the hall closet, jammed my arms into it, and snatched my hat. As I reached the door, Wolfe's voice stopped me, calm and sharp. Archie. I turned. You will take Saul Panzer with you, he said. Call him from the street. And Archie, Do not improvise heroics. I never do, I said. Wolfe's eyes held mine. That was a lie, he said. Therefore attempt it less. I grinned despite myself. Merry Christmas, I said, and went out into the cold. The air had turned mean. The wind came down the street in gusts, carrying with it a first scattering of snow. Tinny hard grains that stung your cheeks and made the city lights look slightly blurred, like New York was trying on a softer face for the holiday. I pulled my collar up and headed for the cab stand. Behind me, the brownstone's door shut with a solid finality. Somewhere across the river, a woman had gone out for wrapping paper. Somewhere downtown, a man named Guyvarn was scheduled to die. And somewhere in between, someone was confident enough to put it in writing. That kind of confidence is never free. It's bought with planning, with access, and with at least one person who thinks they're untouchable. I hailed a cab, climbed in, and gave the driver the Brooklyn address. As we lurched into the traffic, the snow began to fall in earnest, thin, persistent, and perfectly timed to make everything harder. Christmas Eve, indeed. Chapter 2. A future corpse when Wolfe tells you not to improvise heroics. It's a little like telling a dog not to notice steak. The cab fought its way, south and east, through Christmas Eve traffic that had all the goodwill of a barroom brawl. Snow was no longer flirting, it was committing. The windshield wipers were working like they had a grievance, and every time we slid to a stop, the driver muttered something that would have curdled eggnog. I called Saul Panzer from the cab, because Wolfe had specified it, and because Saul is the only man I know who can step into a situation that's already on fire and complain that the flames are untidy. Saul answered on the second ring. Panzer. Saul, it's Archie. Wolfe wants you, Brooklyn. Bay Ridge. A woman stepped out for wrapping paper, and someone appears to be using Christmas spirit as a weapon. There was a pause, brief, efficient. Address. I gave it, Saul grunted. 10 minutes. No, I said. In this snow, 10 minutes is a miracle. Make it a professional miracle. I'll try, he said, and hung up. By the time the cab dropped me near the corner Marjorie had described, the street looked like a postcard that had been abused. The snow was sticking to parked cars and sidewalks, and the wind sent little swirls of it into your shoes. I paid the driver, who snatched the money like it might run away, and then I looked around. A corner store was still open, lights bright, window cluttered with last-minute candy and cheap ornaments. 2 people went in hunched and hurried. One came out carrying a roll of something under his arm and looking aggrieved at the universe. I stepped inside, and the warmth hit like a small blessing. Behind the counter was a man with sleeves rolled up and a face like he had been appointed guardian of human stupidity. Yeah? I'm looking for a woman, I said. Mrs. Caleb Rook. Dark coat, scarf in a hurry. She came in for wrapping paper about an hour ago. His eyes narrowed. Cops? No, I said. Just a concerned citizen who's bad at minding his own business. He studied me for a beat, then jerked his chin toward the back. She was here, he said. Bought paper and ribbon, left quick. Alone, I asked. He hesitated. A guy was watching her, not inside. Outside. I noticed because he didn't come in and he didn't look cold enough. That made my spine tighten again. Describe him. Tall, the clerk said. Hat, dark coat. He stood by that phone booth out front like he owned it. The phone booth outside was a sad little glass box with snow collecting on the top like frosting on a bad cake. Did he follow her? The clerk shrugged. Maybe he moved after she left. Which way did she go? He pointed. Toward Third. I nodded and moved for the door. Outside, the wind slapped me again. I walked fast the way Wolfe never does, scanning faces, feeling every second as if it was being charged interest. I passed a couple with packages, a kid dragging a sled, a man wrestling with a Christmas tree that looked like it was winning. Half, a block down, I saw a woman on the sidewalk, dark coat, scarf hair pinned under a hat, and for one relieved instant I thought luck had decided to join the holiday. Then a man stepped out of an alley to her left. He wasn't grabbing her. He wasn't threatening her. He was just close enough to speak without raising his voice, and she turned her head toward him like she was trying to decide whether to scream. I crossed the street, without waiting for a signal because traffic was moving at the speed of regret anyway. "Mrs. Rook," I called. She startled and turned toward me. The man with her glanced my way, tall, hat, dark coat, face blank in the manner of a man paid to have no opinions. "Who are you?" she demanded. Her eyes were bright and frightened. "Where is Caleb?" "My name is Archie Goodwin," I said. "Your husband is at Nero Wolfe's house, and right now he's trying to keep something worse than a spoiled Christmas from happening. May I suggest we move out of the wind and away from the gentleman with the personality of a lamppost?" The tall man's mouth twitched. "I don't know you," he said to her. "That's the finest thing you've said," I told him. His eyes flicked to me, measuring indifferent. "Not a mugger, not a kidnapper, something cleaner." Mrs. Rook's voice came out thin. "He said he had a message," she said. "For my husband. He knew my name." I kept my gaze on the man. "What message?" He spoke evenly. "Tell Caleb Rook he is expected at 11. Tell him not to get creative." I smiled. "That's charming. Now tell me who you work for." He didn't even blink. "I don't work for anyone." "That," I said, "is what people say right before they do something they'll regret." He moved then, not toward me, not away, just a shift, like a chess piece sliding to a safer square. "I delivered the message," he said. "That's all." I took a step closer, still smiling, because sometimes a smile is as good as a fist if you use it right. "You also stood outside a store and watched her leave," I said. "That's not delivering a message, that's stalking." His eyes stayed calm. "You're making this complicated." "Christmas Eve does that," I said. He looked at Mrs. Rook. "Go home," he told her, as if he had authority to give the instruction. Then he turned and walked away at a normal pace, which is what men do when they know you can't chase them without abandoning what matters. I watched him go until he turned a corner and vanished. Mrs. Rook's hands were shaking. "Caleb is alive," I said quickly. "But he's involved in something that has teeth. We're going to your sister's apartment right now, and you're going to stay inside with the door locked until I say otherwise." "Understood." She swallowed hard and nodded. I got her moving. We reached the apartment building, got inside, and I made sure the door was locked before I even took off my hat. Marjorie nearly tackled her. There were tears, questions, a flurry of emotion that I didn't have time to admire. "Marjorie," I said, "call the police if anyone knocks. Don't open the door for anyone except me or a uniform. And if the phone rings and it's a voice you don't recognize, hang up." Marjorie stared at me. "What is this?" "A holiday tradition," I said. "Panic and bad decisions." Mrs. Rook gripped my sleeve. "What's happening to Caleb?" I softened my tone by a fraction. "Someone is trying to make him cooperate," I said. "Your job is to stay safe and make it hard for them to do that." I stepped into the hall and pulled the door closed behind me. That's when Saul Panzer showed up. He wore a hat that made him look like he was auditioning for a photograph in a history book, and his coat was dusted with snow. His eyes took in my face, the locked door, and the worry like a man reading headlines. "You found her," he said. "Yes," I said. And the courier, tall, blank, and full of confidence, delivered a message. "Caleb is expected at 11. Don't get creative." Saul's jaw tightened. "That means they were prepared for Wolfe. Or," I said, "they expected Wolfe." Saul looked at me for a beat. "You don't like that thought." "I'm saving it for later," I said. "Right now, I need to call Wolfe and report that we've prevented at least one form of disorder." We went downstairs and into the lobby, where the building smelled like wet wool and old radiators. I called Wolfe from the lobby phone. He answered on the third ring, his voice steady. "Yes, Archie." "We have Mrs. Rook safe," I said. "At her sister's apartment, door locked, instructions given. Also, a tall man in a dark coat approached her outside the store. Delivered a message for Rook. Expected at 11. Don't get creative. There was a pause. I could picture Wolfe's eyes narrowing. Did you detain him? He asked. No, I said. Not without leaving Mrs. Rook alone in the snow with him. He walked away like a man with nothing to lose. Then he is a messenger, Wolfe said. Or he is a decoy. The distinction will matter. Return at once. On our way, I said. As I hung up, Saul said. He's tense. He calls it being logical, I said. Come on. The cab ride back to Manhattan was worse because the snow had decided to make its point. Cars crawled, horns complained. Christmas music seeped out of storefronts like syrup and made everything feel faintly obscene. We reached the brownstone a little after 8. Inside, the warmth and the smell of Fritz's cooking hit me and made me remember that I had not eaten since lunch. Fritz appeared in the hall like a benevolent ghost. Mr. Goodwin, he said, and then his eyes moved to Saul. Mr. Panzer, you are welcome. Thank you, Fritz, Saul said. As if Fritz was the mayor, we went to Wolfe's office. Wolfe was in his chair, and facing him was a man I did not recognize. A thin man, maybe 50, with a tight mouth and eyes that looked as if they were always calculating the cost of air. His suit was good, his hands were clean, and his expression was strained in a manner that suggested he had never been relaxed voluntarily. He rose halfway when I entered, then seemed to think better of it. Wolfe spoke. Archie, Mr. Panzer, this is Mr. Harold Finch. The thin man nodded. Goodwin, he said. His voice was precise and unpleasantly controlled. Panzer. I looked at Wolfe. Finch wasn't on the guest list, I said. No, Wolfe replied. He arrived 10 minutes ago, with information he insists is urgent. Finch swallowed, as if doing it hurt, and as if he had practiced not showing it. Someone will die tonight, he said. I stared. We've already got that scheduled, I told him. Do you have a reservation number? His eyes flashed, but his voice stayed controlled. This is across town, a private Christmas gathering. The victim will be Calvin Shaw. That landed. Wolfe's face did not change, but I saw the small shift in his eyes that meant he had placed a name in a file. Proceed, Wolfe said to Finch. Finch looked at Wolfe as if he were looking at the only solid object in a room. The plan is locked in, he said. Precise. It will happen tonight unless interrupted. Wolfe's tone was mild. Mr. Finch, I do not like prophecies. I'm not a prophet. Finch snapped, then checked himself. I'm informed. Informed by whom? Wolfe asked. Finch's jaw worked. I won't say. Wolfe's eyelids lowered. Then you will say nothing at all, he replied. My time is not a public utility. Finch's composure cracked for the first time. He leaned forward. You don't understand, he said. This isn't a whim. It's not revenge. It's not passion. It's a mechanism. Shaw is a component. Remove him, and other pieces fall into place. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Ah, he said softly. A mechanism that is at least rational. I cleared my throat. For the benefit of those of us who don't collect financiers like stamps, who is Calvin Shaw? Finch looked at me as if annoyed at the need for translation. He's a businessman, he said. Real estate, shipping. He's been consolidating. Wolfe's voice was dry. Consolidating is often a polite word for crushing, he said. Finch's mouth tightened. Yes, I glanced at Wolfe. Sounds familiar, I said. Wolfe's gaze held Finch. Where is this gathering? Finch hesitated just long enough to make me want to grab him by the collar. The Huxley House, he said. Private residence, East 62nd. Wolfe nodded slightly, as if making a note. Who is hosting? Finch's eyes flicked away. Barton Huxley. Wolfe's mouth compressed. Indeed, he said. Mr. Huxley is a man who finds privacy essential, particularly for activities that do not endure daylight. Finch's hands clenched. Then you know what kind of people will be there. I can infer, Wolfe said. Now tell me why you came here. Finch looked straight at Wolfe. Because you prevent disorder, he said. You put things back in their proper places. Wolfe regarded him for a long moment. Then he spoke with careful precision. "I prevent impertinence," he said. "The police prevent disorder when they are competent. I intervene when I am compelled. By my own standards, not by the anxieties of others." Finch's face tightened, and for a second he looked like a man about to beg. Then he said, "If Shaw dies tonight, it won't end. It will begin." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "That," he said, "is a pattern." He shifted his gaze to me. "Archie," he said, "what is the common element between Mr. Rook's warning and Mr. Finch's?" I didn't even pretend. "Money," I said, "power, and people using fear like a wrench." "And time," Wolfe added. "Both insist upon tonight." Saul Panzer spoke for the first time since entering, his voice quiet. "Two separate killings on one night is either coincidence or an arrangement," Wolfe said. Finch's eyes widened slightly. "You see," he said. "You see it." Wolfe lifted a hand, impatient. "Do not congratulate me," he said. "It is premature, Mr. Finch. You will tell me one thing now. How do you know Calvin Shaw will die tonight?" Finch's lips pressed together. His refusal was visible. Wolfe's tone cooled. "If you do not answer, I will do nothing, and you will leave this house." Finch swallowed. His eyes moved to the door as if measuring escape, then back to Wolfe. Finally he said, "Because I heard it," he said. "I heard the details, time, place, method." "And the method?" Wolfe asked. Finch's voice dropped. "A gun," he said, "in the library." I felt my stomach tighten because it matched too closely. Wolfe was still. "Who told you?" he asked softly. Finch shook his head. "I can't." Wolfe's gaze stayed on him. "Then you have come here to purchase my assistance while withholding the coin," he said. "That is not a transaction I accept." Finch's face flushed, then paled. "I'm not withholding to be difficult," he said. "If I name the source, I'll be ruined." Wolfe leaned back slightly, and his voice changed, still calm, but with an edge of decision. "Very well," he said. "Then I will act, not to save a soul, but to prevent disorder. Because disorder is an affront." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Wolfe's eyes moved to me. "Archie," he said, "you will go downtown to the Caswell building. You will ensure that Mr. Rook is not coerced into becoming either accomplice or corpse." "Happy Christmas," I muttered. Wolfe continued. "Mr. Panzer, you will go to East 62nd Street, observe the Huxley House, determine who enters, who leaves, and if possible, the presence of Mr. Shaw." Saul nodded once. "Understood." Wolfe looked at Finch. "And you, Mr. Finch, will remain here," he said, "in this chair. You will answer questions when I ask them. You will not touch anything, and if you attempt to depart, Mr. Goodwin will return and become disagreeable." Finch stiffened. "I'm not a prisoner." Wolfe's eyes were placid. "Of course not," he said. "You are a guest who has asked for my intervention. Guests cooperate." I grabbed my coat. "Before I go," I said, "I'd like one small comfort. Calvin Shaw, Guy Varn. Are we sure we're not dealing with the same man wearing two names?" Finch's head snapped toward me. "Varn," he repeated. Too sharply. Wolfe's eyes narrowed again. "Interesting," he said. He looked at Finch. "You reacted," he observed. "You know that name." Finch's mouth tightened. "I've heard it," he said. Wolfe's voice was quiet, but it carried weight. "Archie," he said, "do not assume there are two problems. It is a common error. There may be one problem wearing two hats." I nodded. As I headed for the door, Wolfe's voice followed me. "Archie," I turned. "Do not improvise heroics," he said again. I grinned. "No promises," I said, and went out into the snow. Behind me in the warm brownstone, Harold Finch sat rigid in Wolfe's red leather chair, a man who had delivered a warning and discovered he was now part of the pattern. And somewhere out in the city, 2 clocks were ticking toward 11. Chapter 3. The house on Alder Street if you want to learn the difference between confidence and foolishness. Try crossing town in a snowstorm on Christmas Eve with 2 murders on the schedule. The cab I got after leaving the brownstone had a heater that worked only in theory. The driver wore fingerless gloves and an expression that said the holiday spirit had tried to climb in his window and he had thrown it back into the street. He took my directions with a grunt and aimed the car east and uptown through traffic that had given up pretending it was going anywhere. Alder Street was one of those quiet little offshoots that New York keeps as a secret for people who like their money to feel private. It wasn't long, more a suggestion than a street, and the houses on it were brick and stone with clean stoops and iron railings that looked decorative but could break a man's arm if necessary. The Shaw residence sat in the middle of the row, 4 stories with a polished front door, a brass knocker that gleamed in the street lamp, and windows curtained with expensive discretion. The kind of place where nothing is ever out of place, especially the guilt. I paid the driver, stepped into the snow, and took a slow look up and down the street. No one loitered, no one rushed, no car idled with its lights off. That didn't reassure me. It annoyed me. Trouble that announces itself is considerate. Trouble that hides is what gets you. I crossed to the opposite side and walked past the house once, like a man who belonged there. The snow helped. It gave everyone an excuse to keep their heads down and move quickly. I glanced at the basement windows, at the side gate, at the alley that ran behind the houses. Everything looked sealed and neat, like a wrapped present. Then I settled into a spot near a bare-limbed tree and waited. The first guests arrived a little after 9. A black sedan pulled up. Tires crunching slush, and a couple stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a coat that looked like it had been tailored to make him look richer than he already was. She wore a fur hat and a smile that was too bright for the weather. They climbed the steps as if they were approaching a stage. A moment later, another car, then another. Men in dark coats, women in evening coats, with collars turned up against the cold, laughter that sounded practiced. Compliments exchanged at the door. Everyone carried something: wine, a wrapped box, a bouquet, tokens that said, "I'm civilized," which is a trick people use when they want to forget what they're capable of. If there was a man among them who had come to kill Calvin Shaw, he did not have the courtesy to look like it. I kept watching. There was no shouting, no argument in the street, no sudden stop on the steps. The door opened and closed with smooth efficiency as guests were admitted. Every face that passed into the warm light looked composed, as if the evening had been planned with a ruler. It was too calm. I took a slow walk again, closer this time, and let my eyes pick at details. The house had a small vestibule. Through the glass I could see a hint of a hall, a coat stand, the movement of a servant in dark clothes. There were no uniformed policemen, no obvious security. That didn't mean there wasn't any. It meant it was the kind you don't notice until it has you by the throat. Across the street, a delivery van pulled up and a man in a cap carried a flat box toward a neighboring house. He nodded at me like we were both fellow citizens enduring the elements. I nodded back, then watched him through the corner of my eye until he disappeared. No one paid me attention. That was either good news or a warning. At 10 minutes past 9, a man arrived alone in a taxi. He stepped out quickly, paid the driver, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, as if hesitating. He was in his 40s, average height, with a narrow face and hair that had started to retreat. His coat was expensive, but worn at the edges in a way that suggested he had been too busy to replace it. His eyes darted up at the windows, then down the street. He looked like a man who wanted to be anywhere else. He started up the steps, paused, turned his head as if he felt my eyes on him, and then continued to the door. That was the first crack in the evening's Polish. I pulled my collar up and walked away from the house to a corner where I could use a phone without looking like I was staging a melodrama in the snow. I found a payphone that still existed out of sheer stubbornness, shook snow off my gloves, and dialed the number Wolfe had given me to reach him when he was not in the mood to be reached. He answered with a curt, "Yes, it's me," I said. "I'm at the Shaw residence on Alder Street." A pause. "Proceed. The place is polished enough to hide dirt well," I told him. "Guests are arriving with smiles and packages. No visible threats, no arguments, No weapons in sight. It's calm. Calm is not evidence, Wolfe said. No, I said. But it's too calm, like the house is holding its breath. Another pause shorter. Any notable arrivals? One man, I said. Arrived alone, looked uneasy, hesitated at the steps. Not the usual holiday cheer. Description, Wolfe demanded. I gave it. Wolfe was silent for a beat. Then, continue to observe, he said. Do not enter unless you must. That's what I was hoping you'd say, I replied. I'm not dressed for mingling, I'm dressed for freezing. Wolfe ignored that. What of the Caswell matter? I'm heading there after I finish here, I said. But Finch's target is tonight, and you told Saul to cover Huxley. I'm covering Shaw, and right now the danger isn't loud. It's tucked neatly into the evening. Yes, he said. It is the quiet that permits precision. I hung up and went back to watching. More guests arrived, a stout man in a fedora, laughing too loudly. A woman with a jeweled pin at her throat and eyes that assessed everything. A pair of younger men, both with slick hair and confident smiles. A thin woman holding a small box as if it contained something fragile. They moved into the house like pieces being placed on a board. At 9:30, a car pulled up and a man stepped out who did not smile. He was older, late 50s, maybe 60, with a heavy brow and a mouth set in a permanent scowl. He moved with the certainty of someone used to being obeyed. His coat was dark and perfectly cut, and he carried no gift. He climbed the steps without hesitation and knocked once sharply. The door opened at once. He went in without waiting to be welcomed. That was another crack, because it suggested the house was not merely hosting a party, it was receiving someone important enough to bend manners. If that man was Calvin Shaw, then the victim had arrived. If he was not, then he was someone Shaw would not keep waiting. They stayed where I was and watched the house as the snow thickened and the street grew muffled. The lamps cast cones of light that made the falling flakes look like a slow, endless curtain. Everything remained quiet. The door opened only when guests arrived. No one stormed out. No one came running down the steps. And that was what bothered me most. Because if you were planning something precise, something that had to happen without fuss, you would want the setting to be exactly like this. Warm inside, quiet outside, a snowstorm to muffle sound, and thin the street traffic guests to provide cover, and a house so respectable it would take a body before anyone admitted it had ever harbored one. I checked my watch, 9:42. Midnight was still a long way off, but the night had the feel of a trap that had already been sprung, and was simply waiting for the snap. I shifted my stance, moved closer to the tree for shelter, and kept my eyes on that polished front door. Because the danger wasn't coming in shouting. It was already inside, wearing a smile, taking off its coat, and accepting a drink. Chapter 4. Wolfe reads the man, not the crime if there is one thing. Nero Wolfe enjoys less than prophecy, it is delayed honesty. I was not present for the opening rounds of Finch's second interrogation, which was probably fortunate for Finch. Wolfe does his best work when he is not distracted by my commentary, and Finch had already exhausted the tolerance allotted to him for vagueness. By the time I returned to the brownstone, wet, cold, and irritated, the air in the office had that unmistakable density that means Wolfe has been applying pressure with care. Finch sat in the red leather chair opposite Wolfe's desk. He had not moved since I last saw him, except to deteriorate. His suit was still immaculate, but his posture had collapsed into something defensive, and the tight control he had worn like armor was cracked around the edges. His hands rested on his knees now, palms down, as if he were afraid they might betray him. Wolfe regarded him over steepled fingers. You have been economical with the truth, Wolfe said, his voice mild and relentless. That economy is no longer acceptable. Finch lifted his eyes. They were bloodshot now. I told you what matters. You told me conclusions, Wolfe replied. I require premises. Finch swallowed. I can't give you names. Wolfe snorted softly. Names are conveniences, he said. I am not asking for them. I am asking for sequence. There was a pause. The clock on the wall ticked with exaggerated clarity, like it resented being ignored. Finally, Finch spoke. "I overheard it," he said, too quickly. Wolfe did not react. That, in itself, was a reaction. "When?" Wolfe asked. "Weeks ago," Finch said. The words coming faster now, as if momentum were safer than stopping. "Early November. I was at a private dinner, not a party business. There were only 4 of us. I excused myself to take a call. When I came back, I stopped in the hallway because I heard my name." Wolfe inclined his head slightly. "A common temptation." "They weren't speaking loudly," Finch continued. "They didn't expect anyone to be there, and I heard one of them say," he hesitated, then went on. "By Christmas, Shaw will be gone. Continue." "I listened," Finch said. "I shouldn't have, but I did. They talked about timing, about guests being useful, about how people see what they expect to see, about how no one questions a man dying in his own house surrounded by friends." Wolfe's voice was cool. "And you did nothing?" Finch flinched. "I didn't believe it," he said quickly, the reflex of a man denying responsibility before denying facts. "Not really. Men talk. They exaggerate. They posture, and Shaw." He stopped, then said quietly, "Shaw makes enemies. People threaten him all the time." "So you dismissed it," Wolfe said. "Yes," Finch said. "I told myself it was bravado, or wishful thinking, or a hypothetical." Wolfe leaned back slightly. "Then why did you come to me tonight?" Finch laughed once sharply. "Because tonight, the hypothetical became precise," he said. "I received a call this afternoon. No voice, just a recording. It named the house, the hour, the fact that there would be snow, it said. Tonight makes sense. People will be distracted." Wolfe's fingers tapped once against the desk. "And still you delayed." "I was afraid," Finch said. The admission came out flat, stripped of pride. "Not for myself. At first for my position, my reputation if I accused the wrong people. I would be finished. I told myself that if nothing happened, I'd be grateful I kept silent." "And when you could no longer tell yourself that," Wolfe said, "you came here." "Yes," Finch said. "Fear finally chased me through your door. Fear of what would happen if I stayed silent any longer." Wolfe studied him in silence. Finch held his gaze, now no longer defiant, no longer guarded, just exhausted. After a long moment, Wolfe spoke. "You are not lying," he said. Finch sagged slightly, as if a cord had been cut. "But," Wolfe continued, "you are late." Finch's head jerked up. "Late, yes," Wolfe said. "Your information is not false. It is stale. You bring me a plan conceived weeks ago and activated tonight. Whatever flexibility once existed has been removed." He shifted in his chair, his massive frame settling with decision. "That is why you are so disturbed. You sense that events are no longer adjustable." Finch nodded slowly. "That's exactly it." Wolfe's eyes narrowed, which makes the true problem quite clear. Finch waited. "So did I said from the doorway. Wolfe glanced at me. "You may sit, Archie," he said. "Your timing is adequate." I took my chair and looked at Finch. He looked worse than when I'd left him, which in Finch's case meant closer to honesty. "The puzzle," Wolfe said, addressing us both, "is not whether Calvin Shaw will be murdered. Given the convergence of evidence, I regard that as highly probable." Finch stiffened. "The puzzle," Wolfe continued, "is how the murder can occur in plain sight." He let that hang for a moment. "Men imagine secrecy as concealment," Wolfe said. "In truth, the most effective concealment is familiarity. A Christmas gathering, a private house, friends, associates, guests. No one expects violence in such a setting. Therefore, no one perceives it." Finch's voice was hoarse. "You think it will happen in front of them?" "I think," Wolfe said precisely, "that it will happen among them." He turned to me, Archie, your report from Alder Street confirms this. Calm, polite arrivals. No visible threat. A house arranged to absorb an anomaly without acknowledging it. I nodded. It feels padded, I said. Like a soundproof room. Exactly, Wolfe said. Now consider the method you were told. A gun, Finch said quietly. In the library? Yes, Wolfe said. A firearm is noisy, it disrupts. Unless, his eyes gleamed. Its report is disguised. Finch frowned. Disguised how? By expectation, Wolfe replied. A dropped tray, a slammed door, laughter, music, applause, or timing, a moment when attention is deliberately diverted. He rose heavily from his chair and moved to the globe, resting one hand on it, as if steadying the world. Such a murder does not require secrecy afterward, Wolfe went on. Only confusion at the instant it occurs. The body will be discovered, that is inevitable, but the act itself will be witnessed by no one who recognizes it as such. Finch stared at him. Then it's unstoppable. Wolfe turned. Nothing is unstoppable, he said, but some things cannot be prevented directly. They must be exposed. He returned to his desk and sat. Mr. Finch, you believed your usefulness lay in warning me of danger. In fact, your usefulness lies elsewhere. Finch blinked. Where? In motive, Wolfe said, and in a mission. Finch's mouth tightened. I don't follow. You overheard a plan weeks ago, Wolfe said. You did not act. That delay is significant. It suggests that you were not initially threatened, nor implicated. Yes, Finch said cautiously. Yet tonight you were compelled to act, Wolfe continued. Something changed, not the plan, but your position relative to it. Finch's breath caught. You think they intend to involve me. I think, Wolfe said, that you have already been involved, perhaps as a witness, perhaps as an alibi, perhaps as a contingency. Finch shook his head. Number I would never, willingly, Wolfe finished. That is immaterial. He looked at me. Archie, how many guests did you count? Hard to say, I replied. A dozen so far, more coming. And all, Wolfe said, are potential camouflage. He turned back to Finch. Tell me one more thing, he said quietly. At that dinner weeks ago, how many men were present? Finch swallowed. 3 others. Did any of them attend Shaw's gatherings before? Wolfe asked. Yes, Finch said. All of them? Wolfe nodded, satisfied. Then the murderer will not arrive as a stranger. Silence settled over the room, thick and deliberate. At last Finch spoke. Can you stop it? Wolfe's expression was stern, almost severe. I can disrupt it, he said. I can force recognition, and I can ensure that when the moment comes, it cannot hide. He looked at the clock. Time, Wolfe said, is now our enemy. He met my gaze. Archie returned to Alder Street. You will not interfere. You will observe, and you will be prepared to act only when recognition is required. I grimaced. That's vague enough to be dangerous. Yes, Wolfe said, but it is accurate. He looked at Finch one last time. You will remain here, he said. Your lateness has already done enough harm. Do not add to it. Finch nodded mutely. I stood, pulled on my coat, and paused at the door. Behind me, Wolfe spoke once more, almost to himself. A murder that hides in plain sight, he said. How vulgar, and how presumptuous. Outside, the snow had deepened, and the city had grown quieter, as if it, too, were complicit. I headed back toward Alder Street, knowing one thing for certain. When Calvin Shaw died, it would not look like murder. And that was exactly what made it deadly. Chapter 5. Dinner is served. There is something about a formal dinner that makes honest violence seem out of place, like a fist fight in a jewelry store. The silver is too bright, the napkins too correctly folded, the voices too practiced. People sitting down to eat want the world to behave. They don't come prepared for disorder. They come prepared to pretend, across from the Shaw house on Alder Street. With snow tapping steadily at my hat, brim and sliding down the collar of my overcoat, I watched that pretense settle into place as neatly as the place cards on the table. The house was a polished brick rectangle, with curtained windows and a front door that opened only for the invited. It gave off warmth, the way rich people do, without effort, and with an assumption that the rest of us would appreciate the privilege of noticing it. The street itself was muffled by snow, the kind that turns traffic into a whisper and makes every step sound like a soft insult. Christmas Eve had reduced the city to a smaller set of noises, distant horns, the hum of a radiator somewhere, the occasional laugh from people who still believed in holiday miracles. I did not. I believed in schedules, in greed, and in men who thought they could hide a death the way they hid bad contracts, behind paperwork and polite smiles. Wolfe had told me to observe, he hadn't told me to freeze, so I improvised in the one way Wolfe approves. I made a sensible adjustment. Half a block down Alder Street, there was a narrow service alley between two buildings, partly sheltered from the wind. I moved there and found a recessed doorway that let me keep the Shaw house in view without standing directly under a street lamp, like a target in a shooting gallery. From that angle I could see the glow through the front windows. When the curtains shifted, could catch silhouettes crossing the hall, could judge timing by the way the servants moved like pieces in a quiet machine. A party that includes a planned murder is still a party. People still arrive late, people still bring gifts that mean nothing. People still have to be fed. And feeding them, if you watch it carefully, tells you nearly everything. At about 10:15, the last round of guests arrived in 2s and 3s, coats heavy with snow and secrets. They climbed the steps with the brisk confidence of people who have never been refused. The front door opened promptly each time. No fumbling, no delays. Whoever was managing the entrance had a list in their head and a rhythm in their hands. The guests were a study in money at play, men with shoulders built by good tailoring, not hard labor, women with hair done in a way that implies an appointment and a tip. Laughter that came easily, but not sincerely. More than once I saw a man pause at the threshold to brush snow from his lapels, as if the snow were an insult. More than once I saw a woman glance back toward the street, not because she feared anything, but because she wanted to be seen arriving. If one of them was there to kill Calvin Shaw, they had the good sense not to look like it. Inside, the lights brightened, shadows gathered. The house seemed to inhale, then hold it dinner. I could not see the dining room clearly from my post, but I could see enough to tell when the guests were being shepherded into place. Movement in the hall became more purposeful. A servant crossed carrying what looked like a stack of plates. Another carried a tray that glinted with glassware. Someone, probably the host or Shaw himself, paused near the front hall mirror long enough to adjust a tie. A small thing, but men about to eat in public adjust their ties the way they adjust their masks. I checked my watch. 10:22. Then I saw him. Calvin Shaw crossed the line of sight in the front parlor, and for a second the light caught his face. He was built like a man who had never been told no, broad through the shoulders, thick at the neck, with a heavy brow and a mouth that was set naturally into a scowl, even when he was smiling. He moved without haste, but not lazily. It was the stride of a man who believed the world was arranged for his convenience. Because so far it had been. Shaw laughed at something someone said, one deep burst that made his shoulders lift. He was enjoying himself. That should have reassured me. It didn't. It irritated me. Because it suggested he didn't suspect a thing, and a man who doesn't suspect is the easiest kind to kill. A moment later, I saw other silhouettes following him. A man with a narrow profile and slick hair. A woman whose posture was too straight. Another man who carried himself like he belonged at the head of a boardroom table. The group moved as one unit, a cluster of influence drifting toward the dining room. The curtains shifted, candlelight appeared. If I had stayed outside all night, I could have watched timing and shadows and maybe learned something. But timing and shadows don't tell you whose hand hesitated when the glass was poured, or whose eyes flicked to the wrong place at the wrong moment. Wolfe liked patterns. I liked details, and details, the useful ones, were inside. I needed a closer look. The Shaw house, like most houses of that caliber, ran on staff. Staff has entrances. Staff has routines. Staff also has a blind spot, the size of a man in a dark coat, if he knows how to stand in it. I left my sheltered doorway and moved along the side of the block, keeping to the edge where snow piled against the curb. Halfway down the row, I found the service alley I'd spotted earlier and slipped into it. The alley ran behind the houses like a narrow, private corridor of brick and trash cans, with a single line of dim bulbs strung overhead. The snow fell less heavily there, caught by the buildings, but the cold stayed. At the rear of the shore house, there was a service door with a small window. Light spilled from within. I could hear muted voices, kitchen voices, brisk and practical. I knocked once, softly, not like a guest, but like a man who belonged back there. A moment later, the door opened a crack, and a face appeared. A young man, maybe 25, wearing a white apron and the strained look of someone who had been yelled at all evening. "Yes," he snapped. I gave him my best weary professional look. "I'm from Danton Catering," I said. I picked a name that sounded plausible, because it didn't sound clever. "They sent me over with extra hands. You folks are short." He blinked. "We're not." I leaned in slightly and lowered my voice, as if sharing a secret. "I don't care if you are or you aren't," I said. "I care that I've been in the snow for 20 minutes, and I'm not going back out to explain to my boss why I'm standing in an alley on Christmas Eve." That had the ring of truth, because it was mostly true. His eyes flicked over me, coat, gloves, face. He didn't recognize me, but in a kitchen full of strangers moving fast, recognition is a luxury. He hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Fine," he said. "Get in, don't get in the way." "I never do," I said, and stepped inside. Warmth hit me like a shove. The kitchen was bright, crowded, and efficient in the way only a well-paid staff can manage. Steam rose from pots, platters lined a counter. 2 women in dark uniforms moved like machines, placing food with precise hands. The air smelled of roasted meat, butter, and the sharp bite of citrus from some sauce that had been reduced into submission. No one looked at me twice. That's the magic of service. If you look busy, people assume you are supposed to be there. I took an apron from a hook, white, clean, and tied it on over my coat. The young man pointed at a tray of bread rolls. "Take those out," he said. "Dining room now." I picked up the tray and carried it toward the hall. As I moved through the service corridor, I listened. From beyond a closed door came the drift of laughter and conversation, the cultivated sound of people enjoying themselves without meaning it. Someone's voice rose in a story. Someone else laughed a beat too late. Glasses clinked lightly, not in celebration but in habit. I reached the dining room door and paused long enough to adjust my grip and my nerves. Then I pushed the door open and stepped into the theater. The room was long and handsome, done in that expensive neutral style that makes everything look calm even when it isn't. The table ran nearly the length of it, set with white, linen, candles, silver, crystal, enough shine to make a poor man feel guilty for owning a fork. Place cards sat at each setting, and the chairs were arranged with such precision you could have measured them. The guests were seated now, the first course already in front of them, a soup pale and glossy. The candles made the surface gleam. Steam rose in delicate curls. Calvin Shaw sat at the head of the table, nearest the far end where the sideboard stood. He held court without trying, which is the mark of a man who doesn't have to. He wore a dark suit, no jacket, sleeves rolled slightly, as if to show he could be informal when it suited him. His face was flushed with comfort. He was smiling. On his right sat a woman in her 40s with hair pinned back and eyes sharp as needles. She watched the table the way a chess player watches a board. On his left sat a man with slick hair and an eager smile that never quite reached his eyes. Further down were other faces. A stout man with a laugh, too loud, an older man with a carefully neutral expression, a younger woman with a jeweled pin at her throat, a man whose hands never stopped moving even when he wasn't speaking. Hands, I noticed, are always doing something at a table, lifting spoons, tearing bread, adjusting a cuff, tapping a finger against a stem. If you want to see tension, you watch hands. I moved along the side of the room, silent, placing the bread rolls at intervals. No one thanked me. No one looked at me. I was invisible in the best way good. I watched Shaw's hands. They were large, confident hands, the hands of a man who signs papers and expects them to be obeyed. He held his spoon loosely, ate with appetite, and spoke between bites without losing his rhythm. He gestured with the spoon once lightly, to emphasize a point, and the woman beside him smiled politely, as if she had heard it before. Wine was on the table, opened. A servant poured into glasses with careful control. Most of the guests accepted the pour with slight nods, as if the wine were a foregone conclusion. Shaw's glass received only a small amount. That caught my attention. When the servant moved on, Shaw did not reach for the glass. He ate. He talked. He laughed. The glass sat there like an unused prop. He was drinking little. That meant Shaw was cautious, or had a habit of keeping his senses intact, or had learned the hard way that drinking dulls you at the wrong moments. It also meant that if someone planned to poison him through alcohol, they had chosen a poor instrument. Unless the poison wasn't in the wine. Unless the poison wasn't poison. I made my way back toward the door, keeping my head slightly lowered, listening. Conversation drifted in fragments. Contracts will tighten after the first quarter. No, I don't think the city will approve that variance. You can't expect people to pay that, not now. The language of people who call greed busyness, so they can sleep. Shaw's laugh boomed again. You're all too cautious, he said. That's why you'll always be chasing and I'll be eating. The stout man laughed loudly at that. A laugh that sounded like a favor, the slick. Haired man smiled, quick and obedient. The sharp-eyed woman beside Shaw kept her face composed, but her fingers tightened briefly around her spoon. A flicker, a tiny betrayal. Not enough to accuse, but enough to note. A second course arrived, fish pale and perfectly arranged, sauce draped like a tailored suit. The servants moved in a coordinated sweep, plates removed, plates placed, silver adjusted. It was so smooth it could have been rehearsed. That, too, was unsettling, because if you wanted to stage a death, you would want the staff moving on cue. You would want moments when everyone's attention dipped to their plates at once. You would want pauses that looked natural. I watched the pouring again, water this time, into glasses that had been emptied. Shaw took water, a sip, not much. Then he returned to talking. He was enjoying control even over his thirst. No visible threats, no arguments, no sudden hostility. If there was hatred at that table, it wore evening clothes. A toast came at 10:41. A man halfway down the table rose, glass in hand. He was the younger one whose hands never stopped moving. He cleared his throat and smiled broadly. To Calvin, he said, for reminding us that the city still belongs to those who dare. A ripple of polite applause, soft, restrained. Glasses lifted. Shaw raised his glass too, but again he held it in that casual manner that suggested he was not a man who feared what was in it. He smiled broadly, nodded once as if accepting tribute, and said, "Two profits." Laughter glasses touched lightly, not enough to spill. Then the glasses lowered. I felt my pulse tighten because in that instant, everyone's hands were moving in the same direction. Everyone's eyes were on their own glass, or on Shaw's face. And if someone wanted to do something small, something that would vanish into motion, that was the moment. But nothing happened. Shaw sipped once, small, and set the glass down. The world continued. Dessert later came with the same precision. Something pale and elaborate, shaped like a dome, with a drizzle that looked artistic enough to be framed. Coffee followed, poured from a silver pot into cups with thin handles. The staff never stumbled. No dropped tray, no accidental bump, no clumsy reach. That was the point. Clumsiness draws eyes. Precision lets things disappear. By 11:02, the atmosphere shifted slightly, not in words, but in posture. Men leaned back. Jackets were adjusted. The women at the table glanced toward the hall, anticipating the next act. Shaw pushed his chair back and stood, not with the stiffness of age, but with the satisfaction of a man finishing a performance. "Library," he said, as if it were a command and a gift, seemingly harmless. "Let's finish the night properly." Chairs moved, guests rose, a small hum of movement, polite and orderly. And there it was, the transition Wolfe had predicted. Dinner was the first act, designed to relax everyone, to establish normalcy, to make the evening feel like tradition. The move to the library was the second act, when men could talk more freely, when drinks could be poured again, when the lighting would be softer and the room smaller and the air thick with comfort. Because after dinner, people expect a man to look flushed. People expect him to breathe heavier. People expect him to lean back and close his eyes for a moment. People expect comfort to look like weakness. The guests drifted out of the dining room, following Shaw. The sharp-eyed woman stayed close to his right side. The slick-haired man hovered near his left. The uneasy man I'd seen arrive earlier moved last, as if he would have preferred not to go at all but couldn't refuse. I remained near the wall, tray in hand, as the room emptied. No one looked at me, no one questioned me. A servant's invisibility is the best camouflage in the world. When the last guest left, I slipped back through the door into the service corridor and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. In the kitchen, the young man barked, "More coffee to the library now, and bring the brandy." Brandy, of course. I picked up the coffee tray with steady hands and moved toward the library. As I walked, one thought settled into place with cold clarity. Whatever was planned would not be dramatic. It would not be loud. It would not be a man standing over another man with a smoking gun while everyone screamed. It would be something that could be mistaken for fatigue, for indigestion, for a sudden weakness brought on by rich food and warm rooms and age. It would be a death that could hide inside comfort. The murder wouldn't look like murder at all, and that meant the killer wasn't counting on getting away in the dark. He was counting on getting away in the light, while everyone was looking right at it and seeing only what they expected to see. Chapter 6, The Missing Gift. If there is a better hiding place than goodwill, I haven't found it. The library at the Shaw house was exactly what a man like Calvin Shaw would choose to end his evening in. Deep chairs that suggested permanence, shelves of books that had been selected more for binding than content, and lighting designed to make every face look slightly kinder than it deserved. A fire burned low in the grate, not for warmth but for atmosphere. The air smelled of coffee, brandy, and confidence. I entered with the tray and became furniture again. The guests arranged themselves naturally, meaning predictably. Shaw took the central chair near the fire, his back to the shelves, facing the room like a monarch receiving a court. The sharp-eyed woman settled near him, angled just enough to listen. The slick-haired man perched on an armrest, eager and attentive. Others chose chairs along the perimeter, creating a loose semicircle that framed Shaw without appearing to do so. Someone took the brandy tray from me. Someone else accepted coffee, glasses clinked softly. The fire popped once, sending a tiny shower of sparks up the chimney. Everything appeared orderly, which made it deceptive. I glanced toward the far corner of the room, where a Christmas tree stood. It was not large, tastefully sized, but it was decorated with expensive restraint. White lights, gold ornaments. No tinsel, beneath it sat a modest pile of wrapped gifts, arranged neatly as if even generosity required order. I noticed them because Shaw noticed them. He smiled faintly and nodded toward the tree. "We'll do that later," he said. "No need to rush sentiment." A polite chuckle rippled through the group later. That word stuck. I set the empty tray aside and drifted back toward the service corridor. My role finished for the moment. In the hallway, I paused long enough to let my eyes adjust and my thoughts catch up. Dinner had gone exactly as planned, too exactly. The transition to the library had been smooth, unremarkable, and perfectly timed. Shaw looked comfortable, relaxed even. He had loosened his collar, leaned back, accepted brandy. His cheeks were flushed now, but not alarmingly so. A man of his age and size could look like that after a good meal and a warm room. If someone were waiting for an opportunity to do something small, unnoticed, and irreversible, this was the setting they had designed. I moved farther down the corridor and took out my phone. Wolfe answered on the first ring, which told me he hadn't moved from his chair. "They've moved to the library," I said quietly. "Shaw's comfortable, brandy's out, coffee's served." And Wolfe prompted. "And nothing is happening," I said. "Which means something already has." "Explain," Wolfe said. "Dinner was too clean," I replied. "No slips, no tension. If the plan was poison or a gun, I would expect a trigger by now. Instead, everything feels concluded." Wolfe was silent for a moment. I could hear the faint tick of his clock through the line. "Describe the room," he said. I did. Chairs, fire guests, tree. "The tree," Wolfe repeated. "Yes," I said. "Decorated, gifts underneath." Shaw noticed them, deferred opening them. Another pause. Then Wolfe said, "How many gifts?" "Half a dozen," I said. "Various sizes, all wrapped." "Were they present earlier?" Wolfe asked. I frowned. I didn't notice them during dinner. "That," Wolfe said, "is not the same as absence." "No," I admitted, "but they're noticeable now." "Observe them," Wolfe said. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and returned to the library doorway, careful to look as though I had business there. From my angle I could see the tree clearly. 6 gifts, boxes and parcels in tasteful paper. Ribbons tied with competence. None of them ostentatious, none of them small enough to be dismissed as trivial. I watched as the conversation continued. Business talk, softened by brandy. Laughter came more easily now, looser around the edges. Shaw leaned back, glass resting on his stomach, one hand draped over the arm of the chair. He looked content. I checked my watch. 11:11. The window for subtlety was closing. A servant entered quietly and knelt to add a log to the fire. As he did, his shoulder brushed the tree. One of the gifts shifted slightly, the ribbon slipping. The servant froze, adjusted the box, and withdrew, eyes lowered. No one commented. But when the servant left, I counted again. 5 gifts. Zone was missing. I did not move. I did not react. I simply stood there and let the realization settle. The missing gift had not been large, medium-sized, rectangular, wrapped in dark green paper with a thin gold ribbon. The sort of gift that looks respectable without being memorable. No one in the room seemed to notice. No one admitted touching it. Because no one expects theft beneath a Christmas tree at a private party, and because gifts, by their nature, are assumed to belong. I backed out of the room and returned to the corridor, my pulse steady but intent. I called Wolfe again. "There were 6 gifts under the tree," I said. "Now there are 5. Wolfe did not respond immediately. Then, "Good." "That's not reassuring," I said. "It is illuminating," Wolfe replied. "Who removed it?" "I didn't see," I said. No one reacted. "Precisely," Wolfe said. "That is its value." I leaned against the wall, lowering my voice. "You think the gift is the weapon?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that a gift, seemingly harmless, is the perfect container." "For what?" I asked. "For expectation," Wolfe said. "It is innocent. It is welcome. It is unquestioned. No one inspects a gift. No one resents its presence. No one recalls its movement." I closed my eyes briefly. So the killer planned generosity as camouflage. "Yes," Wolfe said. "A wrapped object may contain anything. A firearm, a mechanism, a toxin, and it may be handled, moved, opened, or removed without suspicion. But it's gone now," I said. "What does that mean?" "It means," Wolfe replied, "that the critical object has reached its destination." I straightened. "Which is?" That, Wolfe said calmly, is what we must determine before it performs its function. I peeked back into the library. Shaw was still alive, still smiling, still talking. But his brandy glass now rested on the side table beside him, closer to his right hand than before. The sharp-eyed woman leaned in slightly, speaking quietly. The slick-haired man laughed too loudly at something. Shaw said the guests were comfortable enough now that small changes went unnoticed, like the absence of a gift, seemingly harmless. Wolfe, I said, if the gift contained something mechanical, something timed, then the removal was not to activate it. Wolfe finished. It was to place it. Place it where? I asked. Where it could act without being observed, Wolfe said, or where its effects could be misattributed. I swallowed. You're saying Shaw doesn't have to open it? Correct, Wolfe said. In fact, opening it would be undesirable. Too much attention, too much certainty. Another pause. Archie, Wolfe said, what is the one thing everyone expects a man to do after a large meal and several drinks? I didn't like how quickly the answer came. Sit, I said. Relax. Lean back. And perhaps, Wolfe added, remove his jacket, loosen his collar, adjust his chair. I glanced at Shaw again. His jacket was already off. Wolfe, I said, I think the gift isn't meant for Shaw to open. No, Wolfe said. It is meant for Shaw to use. The word chilled me. Use how? Unknowingly, Wolfe replied. As support, as convenience, as comfort. I looked around the library with new eyes, chairs, tables, sideboards, a small upholstered footstool near Shaw's chair that hadn't been there before, dark green fabric, gold trim. My stomach tightened. Wolfe, I said, there's a footstool near Shaw's chair, green gold trim. It wasn't here earlier. Silence. Then Wolfe spoke, and his voice had gone very cold. Archie, he said, do not touch it. That object, Wolfe continued, is either the instrument or the final concealment, a gift transformed into furniture, innocent, useful, unremarkable. I watched as Shaw shifted his feet and placed them squarely on the stool with a satisfied sigh. No one reacted. No one questioned it. Wolfe, I said quietly, if you're right, then the murder is already underway. Yes, Wolfe said, and it will not announce itself. The fire crackled softly. Laughter drifted. And beneath the Christmas tree, the absence of one gift sat unnoticed, because absence, unlike presence, never demands explanation. The killer had not planned violence. He had planned generosity, and that, I realized, was far more dangerous. Chapter 7. Midnight moves closer. There are two kinds of breaking points. One is loud, sudden, and gratifying. The other is quiet, slow, and humiliating. Harold Finch reached his somewhere around 11:30. I was not there to see it, which is just as well. Finch's collapse would not have benefited from an audience, and Wolfe prefers his revelations unaccompanied by theatrics. I heard it later, in Wolfe's voice. And that was enough. I had retreated to the service corridor at the Shaw house, keeping the library under intermittent watch, while pretending to be busy and unimportant. Shaw still lived. He talked. He laughed. His feet rested comfortably on the footstool that had once been a gift, seemingly harmless. If there was a timer running, it was not mechanical. If there was poison at work, it was not chemical, which meant Wolfe was right. The murder was not something done to Shaw. It was something Shaw would do himself. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I stepped into the narrow pantry off the hall and answered. His voice was controlled, but it carried a sharper edge than before. Mr. Finch has revised his position. That sounds painful, I said. It was, Wolfe replied. It was also productive. I leaned against the counter. Go on. Mr. Finch has admitted that the gift was not intended to be opened publicly, Wolfe said. Nor immediately. I closed my eyes briefly. After dinner, I said. Yes, Wolfe replied, alone. That landed with a dull weight. In other words, I said slowly, the killer didn't plan a spectacle. He planned privacy. Precisely, Wolfe said. And he planned anticipation. Anticipation of what? I asked. Though part of me already knew. Wolfe did not answer at once. When he did, his voice was precise and deliberate. Of knowledge, he said. There are worse weapons than guns. Knowledge is one of them. Finch overheard more than timing, Wolfe continued. He overheard intent. The gift was described as clarifying. It was meant to be opened by Mr. Shaw when the evening had ended, when his guests had gone, when the house was quiet, and he believed himself safe. I pictured it too easily, Shaw alone in his study, jacket off, tie loosened, perhaps with a final drink in hand, a gift left behind. Thoughtful, discreet, something he had postponed opening because sentiment can wait. What was in it? I asked. Documents, Wolfe said. Evidence, proof. Of what? Wolfe exhaled softly. Of ruin. The word echoed in my head. Financial, I asked. Yes, and personal, Wolfe replied. Contracts that would expose criminal liability. Correspondence that would implicate him in fraud substantial enough to ensure prosecution. Evidence that would not merely damage him, but obliterate him. And Finch knew this, I said. He suspected, Wolfe replied. He did not know the extent. Only that the information was designed to confront Shaw with a binary choice. I didn't like where this was going. Which was? Public destruction, Wolfe said calmly. Or private escape. Escape meaning, I stopped. Suicide. I let that settle. The laughter from the library drifted faintly down the hall. Someone told a story. Someone else laughed at the wrong moment. The fire popped again. How does Finch fit? I asked. Finch, Wolfe said, was meant to be the conscience who did nothing. He was to know enough to be troubled, not enough to act when he delayed too long. Fear finally overcame self-preservation. So Finch isn't the killer, I said. No, Wolfe agreed. He is collateral damage. Who benefits? I asked. Multiple parties, Wolfe said. That is the elegance of the plan. Shaw's death would halt investigations before they matured. His estate would settle matters quietly. His associates would express shock, grief, and relief in equal measure. And no murder, I said. Just a man who couldn't live with what he learned. Exactly, Wolfe said. A death that invites sympathy instead of inquiry. I looked back into the library. Shaw still sat comfortably, brandy glass untouched now, his attention divided between two men who wanted his approval. His feet rested on the footstool. He looked content, powerful, untouchable. He had no idea what was waiting for him. Wolfe, I said, the gift has already been moved. Yes, Wolfe replied. That troubles me. You think it's already been opened? I asked. No, Wolfe said. I think its contents have been extracted. My grip tightened on the phone. Meaning someone didn't wait. Meaning someone adjusted the plan, Wolfe said. Possibly because of Finch's interference, possibly because of time. Midnight, I said. Is symbolic, Wolfe replied. But symbolism has power over men who believe in control. What do you want me to do? I asked. Wolfe paused. Nothing rash, he said. You must prevent solitude. That's easier said than done, I said. This is a private house. Indeed, Wolfe replied, but solitude is the essential condition. Without it, despair cannot complete its work. So, if Shaw is never alone, then the weapon cannot be used. Wolfe finished. I nodded, though Wolfe couldn't see it. Archie, he added, do you see any indication that Shaw is fatigued or unwell? I looked again. Shaw shifted in his chair, rubbed his eyes briefly, then smiled again as someone spoke. A small thing, a human thing. He looks like a man who's had a good dinner, I said, and too much company. That will suffice, Wolfe said, for now. The line went dead. I slipped the phone away and took a breath. This was not a case where you tackle a man with a gun or knock a glass from his hand. This was a case where the danger lived in a piece of paper and the silence of a room. The killer had not planned violence. He had planned inevitability. I stepped back into the library. The mood had softened further. Coats were being fetched. A few guests checked watches and murmured excuses. One or two lingered, reluctant to leave the warmth. Shaw rose, clapped one man on the shoulder, and laughed. "Don't all run off," he said. "It's not midnight yet." Midnight, the word carried weight now. If Shaw were left alone after midnight, the plan would complete itself. The documents, whether still hidden or already placed, would do their work. A man like Shaw, confronted with total exposure, would calculate outcomes as he always had, and choose control. I moved closer, closer than a servant should, and waited, because the only way to stop a man from destroying himself was to make sure he wasn't alone long enough to decide. Chapter 8, Intervention Stopping a Man from Killing Himself, is a delicate business. You can't shout, you can't accuse, you can't grab him by the lapels and demand gratitude. That only makes the decision firmer. A man who has decided on control does not appreciate being wrestled for it. You have to interrupt the moment, the narrow slice of time when solitude becomes certainty, without letting him feel he has been cornered, which is a fine trick for a trained diplomat, a pastor, or someone with the gift of patience. I had none of the above. I had a borrowed apron over my overcoat, wet snow in my collar, and Nero Wolfe in my pocket like a heavy coin that could buy me one thing: the right words at the right instant. The library at the Shaw House had warmed into that special post. Dinner haze where people become generous with opinions and careless with truth. The fire in the grate had settled into steady coals, and the room smelled of brandy, coffee, and the faint resin tang of the Christmas tree. The tree itself stood in the corner like a polite chaperone, lights winking softly, ornaments shining without enthusiasm. Beneath it lay 5 gifts. 5. Not 6. I kept counting, because counting was the only thing in the room that felt sane. The guests were thinning. Coats were being fetched from the front hall. People drifted in and out of the library in little tides, offering goodbye speeches as if they were auditioning for sincerity. "I wouldn't have missed it," a man said, tightening his scarf as he spoke. "Next year," a woman promised, smiling the way you smile when you know promises are cheap. "Snow's getting worse," someone complained, as if the weather had personal motives. Calvin Shaw accepted them with broad good humor. He clapped shoulders. He shook hands. He laughed the big, confident laugh of a man who believes every exit is on his own terms. He had removed his jacket. His tie was loosened a notch. His face was flushed, but not in a way that would alarm anyone, only in the comfortable way a man gets after heavy food and warm company. He looked like success taking a rest, which is exactly what made him so easy to guide toward the end someone else had written. I drifted to the bar on the far side of the room, pretending to straighten glasses and tidy the decanters. If anyone glanced my way, I looked like a man fulfilling a small task. If anyone looked longer, I looked like staff, busy, invisible, and beneath notice. That invisibility was the only reason I could do what I was about to do. Behind the bar, there was a low cabinet built into the wall, dark wood, polished, discreet. Next to it stood a small rolling cart with bottles arranged like a display. The cart looked freshly placed, a little too aligned, as if someone had set it there recently and then stepped back to admire their own precision. I leaned down to adjust a bottle that didn't need adjusting. Behind the cabinet, half hidden by the cart's wheel, I saw it. Dark green paper, thin gold ribbon, a rectangular shape, medium-sized, large enough to hold a file folder, small enough to be carried casually. It was shoved back there in a way that was almost careless. Almost. But nothing in that house was careless tonight. My pulse tightened, but I did not reach for the package. Not yet. Touching it would make it mine, and I didn't want it to be mine. I wanted it to stay what it was, someone else's instrument. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, a faint vibration against my thigh. It was timed like a cue. I stepped out of the library into the corridor, moving like a man on errands, and slipped into a small pantry off the hall where the light was dimmer and the sound from the party softened. I pulled out the phone and answered. Wolfe's voice came through low and precise, as if he were speaking from inside my skull. "Archie, it's here," I said. "The missing gift behind the bar, unopened." A pause. I could picture Wolfe's eyes narrowing, his lips compressing in that way. That means his mind has moved 3 steps ahead. "Good," he said. "That word is starting to annoy me," I told him. "It is not meant to soothe you," Wolfe replied. "It is meant to indicate you have found a significant fact." "Shaw is still alive," I said. "Still cheerful. Guests are leaving." "Then the essential condition approaches," Wolfe said. "Solitude." "Yes," I said. "Prevent it," he said. "Not with force, with obstruction." "Obstruction requires an excuse," I said. Wolfe did not hesitate. "Use my name," he said. "Use your insolence. Use the gift. And Archie, do not allow him to open it." "That might be difficult if he insists," I said. "Then you must make insistence impossible," Wolfe replied. "By occupying him, by engaging him, by compelling him to answer." "Answer what?" I asked. Wolfe's tone sharpened. "Answer why he is afraid." That was the heart of it. Not the crime, not the documents, not even the death fear. "All right," I said, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. When I stepped back into the corridor, I could hear Shaw's laughter again, closer now. He was walking toward the hall, escorting a couple out. Their polite chatter drifted ahead of them. "Really a lovely evening, Calvin. Tell your wife she must come next time." They passed the couple bundled in coats, faces pink from warmth and wine. Shaw held the front door open for them, with an easy flourish that said he enjoyed being the man who held doors. When they left, he closed it himself, turned, and for the first time all night there was a faint sag in his posture, not weakness, just the momentary fatigue of a performer between acts. Then his eyes flicked toward the corridor, leading deeper into the house, toward privacy, toward a study, toward the end someone had planned for him. He took one step. I stepped into his path. That alone earned me his attention like a slap. He stopped and looked me over. Apron, overcoat, face, his brow furrowed. "Yes?" His tone wasn't angry, not yet. It was the tone of a man mildly offended by something that doesn't belong. "Mr. Shaw," I said, keeping my voice steady and low. "I need a word." His eyes hardened. "Your staff," he said, as if that settled everything. "No." I said, "I'm inconvenient." That got a faint lift of his eyebrows, a mix of irritation and surprise. "I don't have time," he said, already shifting his weight as if to step around me. "You do," I said firmer. "You just don't know why yet." Now his patience frayed. "Who the hell are you?" "Archie Goodwin," I said. "I work for Nero Wolfe." That name landed like a stone dropped in water. No splash, but the ripples were immediate. Shaw's eyes narrowed. "Wolfe," he said. "The fat genius." "Among other flattering descriptions," I said. Shaw's lips compressed. "You're trespassing." "Yes," I agreed, "but not for burglary." He glanced past me toward the library, toward the last few guests lingering, toward witnesses. Then he glanced toward the deeper hall again, toward privacy. His impatience fought with caution. Caution won enough to make him pause. "This is absurd," he said. "Then let it be briefly absurd," I replied, "because if you walk away from me right now, you're going to make a decision you can't revise." His face went still. That was the first real crack. "What decision?" he asked, and his voice had sharpened. My phone buzzed again, 2 quick pulses. Wolfe, keeping time like a conductor. I put my hand in the apron pocket, pressed the phone's edge so I could hear, and kept my eyes on Shaw's. Wolfe's voice murmured, barely audible. "Proceed, tell him about the gift," I said. "Someone left you a gift, seemingly harmless." Shaw's expression barely changed, but his pupils tightened. "There are gifts under the tree," he said curtly. "One is missing," I said, "and one is hidden behind your bar." For the first time, Shaw's composure slipped. Not much, just a flicker of something behind his eyes. Recognition, anger, or fear. It was gone almost instantly, but I saw it, and seeing it told me I was exactly where I needed to be. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. "Then let's look," I said. Shaw stared at me for a long moment, measuring. His pride didn't like being challenged, and his caution didn't like uncertainty. Pride might have thrown me out. Caution wanted to know what I knew. He turned without a word and walked back into the library. I followed, close enough that if he tried to bolt toward the study, I could intercept him again, but not so close that I looked like a threat. The trick is to be present, not aggressive. An irritation, not an attacker. The library had thinned to maybe 4 guests, all hovering near the door with coats half on. One woman stood by the tree, admiring ornaments with forced nostalgia. 2 men were at the far end discussing something in low voices, as if their words were valuable property. Shaw moved straight to the bar, and the remaining guests watched him with mild curiosity. A host rummaging behind his own bar is not alarming. It's almost charming. He knelt, reached behind the cabinet, and drew out the package, dark green paper, gold ribbon, untouched. He stood holding it as if it had suddenly become heavier than a polite present. The room seemed to hold its breath. No one spoke. The last guests looked at one another, puzzled but unwilling to ask questions. A servant paused near the doorway, uncertain whether to intervene. Shaw kept his eyes on the package. His fingers tightened slightly on the edges, crinkling the paper. "Who sent this?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He didn't answer. Wolfe's voice murmured, "Tell him it was meant to be opened alone." "You were meant to open it alone," I said, "after everyone left." Shaw's jaw flexed. "Nonsense," he said, but the word lacked conviction. "It isn't nonsense," I replied. "That's why it wasn't left under the tree." A guest cleared his throat awkwardly. "Calvin, is everything all right?" Shaw didn't look up. "Fine," he said too quickly. "Just fine." The guest nodded as if satisfied, because people accept whatever answers let them remain comfortable. He tugged on his gloves, murmured a goodbye, and edged out with the others. Within seconds, the library emptied completely, except for Shaw, me, and a servant who had retreated to the hall like a shadow. Now the essential condition was close again. Shaw alone, but not entirely. "Wolfe, tell him what's inside." "What's inside?" I said quietly. "Is not meant to entertain guests. It's meant to corner a man." Shaw's eyes snapped up to mine. For an instant, his confident mask slipped, and something raw showed through. Anger, fear, shame, maybe all 3 braided together. "You don't know what's inside," he said, but it sounded like a man arguing with himself. "I know enough," I said. "Documents, proof, contracts, letters, things you thought were buried." His mouth tightened. He glanced toward the door, toward the rest of the house, like a man looking for an exit that wasn't physical. "Every own has ghosts," he said, trying to bring back the old tone. "These aren't ghosts," I said. "They're evidence." He gave a short, harsh laugh. "Evidence of what?" Wolfe's voice, calm and merciless. "Say crimes." "Crimes," I said. That word landed harder than murder ever could. Shaw's shoulders sank by a fraction. He looked down at the gift again, and his hands began to tremble, slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if his body were betraying him while his mind fought for control. "You came here to accuse me," he said hoarsely. "I came here to stop you," I said. "Stop me from what?" he snapped, sudden anger flaring like a match. "From opening a gift, seemingly harmless." "No," I said, and kept my voice steady because steadiness is contagious if you're lucky. "From believing you only have one way out." He froze. "Wolfe, say the word." "Suicide," I said. Shaw flinched as if I had slapped him with it. Silence spread. Outside, the snow tapped softly against the windows. The fire whispered in the grate. The whole house seemed to be listening. Shaw's voice came out rougher now. You think I'd do that? I think you were meant to, I said. That's the plan. Not a murder that looks like murder. A man who learns what's in those papers and decides the neatest solution is to erase himself. His eyes narrowed with pain and rage. And you think Wolfe guessed this from, what? A missing present. Wolfe doesn't guess, I said. He sees patterns. People think murder is always force, but the most efficient kind is suggestion. Shaw's grip on the package tightened until the ribbon bit into his fingers. You don't understand, he said. And the words were raw now. If those papers surfaced, if anyone saw them, you'd be finished, I said. Prison, ruin. The people you bought turning their backs, the people you hurt, lining up to testify. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, the bluster was gone. Yes, he said. A single syllable, like a confession, squeezed out. Wolfe, ask him if he believed it was buried. You thought it was buried, I said. I paid for it to be buried, Shaw whispered. I paid plenty. And you believed money could buy forgetfulness, I said. It usually does, he said bitterly. Not tonight, I said. He stared at the package with a hatred that was almost childlike. Who sent it? I asked again. Shaw shook his head slow. Doesn't matter, he said. There are dozens who'd like to watch me burn. It matters, I said, but it can wait. Right now, what matters is you don't get alone with this. He gave another harsh laugh. You're going to sit with me all night. If I have to, I said. He looked up sharply. Why? He demanded. After what I've done, why would Wolfe care? Why would you? That question was the most honest thing he had said all evening. It wasn't a challenge. It was a wound. I could have answered with morality, or civic duty, or sympathy, and it would have sounded like a sermon. Wolfe hates sermons. Shaw would have hated them more, Wolfe answered instead, through my pocket, in a voice like polished stone, because disorder offends me. I repeated it exactly, because disorder offends him. Shaw stared for a long moment. Then the corners of his mouth twitched, not into a smile, but into something like disbelief. That's it, he murmured. That's the reason. It's a good one, I said, and it's the only one you'll get tonight. Shaw's shoulders slumped, and suddenly he looked older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with food or brandy. He lowered the gift slowly, as if setting down something dangerous. They wanted me to open it alone, he said. They were right. Yes, I said. And they wanted a clean ending, he said, voice flat. A man overwhelmed by the pressures of success. No scandal, no trial, no witnesses who could speak. Yes, I said again. He looked up at me, eyes bright with something like humiliation. And I would have, he whispered. I would have done it. Because I don't. He stopped, swallowed. I don't do cages. That was the line I needed. That was the admission that made Wolfe's theory real. I stepped closer, careful, and held out my hand. Give it to me, I said. For a moment, he hesitated. His fingers tightened again. The urge to control flared. Mine, his mind insisted. My ending, my choice. I didn't pull. I didn't snatch. I just kept my hand there, steady, patient, giving him a way to surrender without feeling defeated. Finally, his fingers loosened. I took the gift. It felt ordinary cardboard. Paper, ribbon, light enough to toss, heavy enough to kill. Shaw sank into the nearest chair like a man whose legs had decided without consulting him. He stared into the fire, jaw clenched. I kept the package tucked under my arm. Now, I said, we're going to do something you hate. He didn't look at me. What? We're going to wait, I said, with company. His mouth twisted. You really are inconvenient. Christmas gift, I told him. In my pocket. The phone vibrated once. Wolfe's silent acknowledgement, as close as he comes to praise. Outside, the snow kept falling, thick and steady, muffling the city and smoothing the night. Inside, midnight moved closer. And for the first time all evening, Calvin Shaw was not alone with his fear, and not alone with the choice someone had prepared for him, like a present under a tree, Chapter 9. The confessor exposed the police arrive the way they always do when trouble has already had time to put on a clean shirt. Late, loud and convinced they're the first ones to understand what happened. I didn't invite them. Shaw didn't invite them. Wolfe did. I learned that while I was still in the library on Alder Street, sitting across from Calvin Shaw with the unopened green package under my arm and my nerves stretched thin as wire, Shaw had tried twice to reclaim the gift with a casual reach, as if he could make it harmless by treating it like a napkin. Both times, I shifted it away without drama, the way you keep a child from sticking fingers into a candle flame. Around 12:10 my phone buzzed again. Wolfe's voice came through, calm and final. "Archie, you have done enough." "I've done just enough to stay cold and unpopular," I said. "What now?" "You will leave Mr. Shaw in the custody of Mr. Kramer," Wolfe replied. That got my attention. "Kramer, you called him?" "I called the police," Wolfe said. "Mr. Kramer will attend. He has the advantage of official presence." "And the disadvantage of believing in it," I muttered. Wolfe ignored that. "Bring the unopened package. Do not allow anyone else to handle it." "Understood," I said. "And Shaw." "Tell him," Wolfe said, "that if he seeks solitude tonight, he will find it in a cell." That was a line only Wolfe could deliver without smiling. I repeated it to Shaw, who reacted as if he had been slapped with reality. He didn't argue. His pride was exhausted. By 12:30, Kramer and 2 uniforms were standing in the Shaw library, stamping snow off their boots and glaring at me as if I had rearranged the city's schedule without permission. Kramer is a big man with a face that looks like it was carved out of stubbornness. He took one look at Shaw, one look at me, and then fixed his eyes on the green package. "What's that?" he demanded. "A present," I said. "The kind that doesn't come with a receipt." Kramer's gaze sharpened. "Goodwin." "Don't touch it," I said. Wolfe said. Kramer made a sound low in his throat. He hates 2 things equally, being told what to do and being told Wolfe said it. He pointed his chin at Shaw. "You all right?" he asked, not kindly. Shaw sat stiffly in his chair, his hands clasped together too tightly. "I'm alive," he said, "thanks to your punctuality." Kramer's nostrils flared. "Cute," he said. Then to me, "Wolfe says get you and that package back to the brownstone." "Fine, let's go. And if this is one of his games—" "It's not a game," Shaw said abruptly. The words came out harsh, stripped of polish. "It was meant to end tonight, quietly." Kramer stared at him. For a second, the room turned colder than the snow outside. "And how?" Kramer demanded. Shaw's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked to the tree, the fire, the door, anywhere but Kramer's face. "Ask Wolfe," he said. Kramer looked at me again. "Fine," he snapped. "We'll ask Wolfe." So we all trooped out into the snow like a miserable holiday parade. Kramer, 2 uniforms, me with the package, and Shaw between them like a man escorting his own reputation to the gallows. Shaw insisted on putting on his overcoat, and I didn't blame him. In New York, dignity and warmth both require layers. At Wolfe's brownstone, Fritz met us at the door with an expression that managed to convey disapproval without disrespect. He ushered the uniforms in with the same calm professionalism he uses on everyone, including men with badges and men with egos. Wolfe was waiting in his office, seated behind his desk as if he had never moved, which he probably hadn't. The room looked exactly as it always does. Orderly, composed, indifferent to the weather and human weakness. Wolfe's eyes flicked to Shaw, to Kramer, to the package under my arm, and then settled on Harold Finch. Finch was in the red leather chair again, but he wasn't sitting like a guest now. He was sitting like a man who has been pinned in place by his own decisions. His hands were clenched, his face pale, and his eyes jumped. When the door opened, Kramer saw him and frowned. "Who's that?" "Harold Finch," I said, "tonight's second prophet." Kramer's gaze hardened. "Finch," he said slowly, "I know you." Finch swallowed. Wolfe spoke before anyone else could. "Inspector Kramer," he said, "thank you for attending. I regret the inconvenience, Kramer snorted. Save it. What is this? Goodwin calls me out in a snowstorm, drags me to some big shot's house, and now you've got Calvin Shaw sitting here like he's waiting for a sermon. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Mr. Shaw is waiting, he said. For you to understand the difference between a confession and evidence. Kramer stared. Start making sense. Wolfe inclined his head slightly, as if beginning a lecture he had already perfected. Mr. Finch came to me this evening, claiming to have learned of a plan to murder Mr. Shaw tonight, he said. He presented himself as a concerned messenger. He is not. Finch flinched. I. Wolfe lifted a hand. Finch stopped, as if the hand were a physical barrier. Wolfe continued, his tone cool. Mr. Finch is not a hero. He is a cowardly accomplice. Kramer blinked once. Accomplice to what? To design, Wolfe said. To preparation, to psychological coercion. I saw Shaw's face tighten. He stared at Finch now with something ugly and focused. That was new. Earlier, Shaw had been absorbed by fear. Now he had a target for it. Finch's voice cracked. That's not fair. Wolfe's eyes held him. It is exact, he said. Kramer leaned forward slightly. You're saying Finch planned it? Wolfe's mouth tightened. He helped assemble the trap, Wolfe said. Not the act of death, but the manufacture of despair. He participated in gathering the documents, arranging their presentation, and selecting the method by which Mr. Shaw would be pushed to a fatal decision. Kramer's gaze went from Wolfe to Finch. Documents. I placed the green package on Wolfe's desk, not opening it, not offering it, just setting it down like a loaded weapon. Found behind Shaw's bar, I said. Unopened, meant for him alone after the party. Kramer looked at it like it might bite him. And you think that would make him kill himself? Wolfe's voice was flat. I do not think, he said. I infer. He turned his attention to Finch again. Mr. Finch, he said, you delayed your disclosure until the plan was in motion. You did not stop it. You attempted, at the last moment, to remove yourself from its consequences. Finch shook his head, desperation rising. I came to you. I warned you. Wolfe's eyes were merciless. Yes, he said, when you could no longer endure the prospect of being discovered later as a participant. Silence. Kramer's face darkened. Is that true, Finch? Finch's mouth opened. No words came out. Wolfe pressed, calmly like a finger on a bruise. You overheard the plan weeks ago, Wolfe said. You did not report it, and you assisted in its preparation. That was not fear of error. It was fear of involvement. You were involved already. You helped select the moment. Christmas Eve, a gathering predictable privacy afterward. You helped craft the gift as camouflage, an object no one questions, moved without suspicion. Finch whispered, I didn't think it would go this far. Wolfe's lips curled slightly with contempt. I didn't believe it, Wolfe said. That is the excuse of men who assist wrongdoing while denying responsibility, the way men deny responsibility before denying facts. Kramer slammed a palm lightly on Wolfe's desk. All right, he snapped. Enough philosophy. What can I charge him with? Wolfe's gaze shifted to Kramer. That, he said, is your province. But you will understand this. Finch's confession is not absolution. It is evidence. He did not prevent a death. He intended one. And then, at the last moment, he attempted to rescue his conscience without sacrificing his safety. Kramer looked at Finch as if seeing him clearly for the first time. You rat, he said quietly. Finch's voice came out thin. I panicked. Yes, Wolfe said. You cracked, but cracking does not erase the pressure you applied. Shaw spoke then, his voice low and hard. You were part of it, he said to Finch. All that talk, all those dinners, all those concerns, you were feeding it. Finch stared at him, eyes wet. You don't understand, he whispered. If those papers came out, you'd destroy everyone around you trying to survive. Shaw laughed once, without humor. So you decided to save the city by killing me. Finch's shoulders slumped. Wolfe's voice cut cleanly through it. Inspector, he said. "You will take Mr. Finch into custody. You will also take the package. You will open it in the presence of officers and appropriate witnesses, document the contents and trace its origin. The handwriting will be absent, but the chain of possession will not." Kramer's eyebrows rose. "You're awfully sure?" Wolfe's eyes were cold. "I am," he said, "because this plan required cooperation. Cooperation leaves fingerprints, if not literal, then behavioral." Kramer looked at the package again, then at Finch. "Get up," he told Finch. One uniform stepped forward. Finch rose unsteadily, as if his knees didn't trust him anymore. Kramer pointed a finger at him. "You don't get to walk in here and play saint," he growled. "You helped build the noose. Wolfe just made sure we see the rope." Finch's face crumpled. "I didn't." "Save it," Kramer snapped. He jerked his head to the uniform. "Take him," as Finch was led toward the door. He turned once, eyes pleading, not at Kramer, not at Shaw, but at Wolfe, as if hoping the great mind would grant him one merciful interpretation. Wolfe did not move. He did not soften. "You are not absolved," Wolfe said quietly. "You are merely exposed, and exposure is permanent." Finch went out, and the sound of the door closing behind him had a finality that felt almost satisfying. Kramer exhaled, then glanced at Shaw. "You," he said, "are going to answer questions, a lot of questions." Shaw nodded once, tired and grim. "I'm done being alone with them," he said. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, eyes half-lidded now, as if the room had returned to order. "I looked at the space Finch had occupied, and thought of something Wolfe had once told me on a different case, in a different season, that the most dangerous criminals are not the ones with appetite, but the ones with excuses." Finch had come to Wolfe, hoping for forgiveness. Instead, he had delivered what Wolfe values more than mercy, a clean line between guilt and courage drawn in evidence. Chapter 10, Midnight Without Blood. Midnight came quietly. No scream cut the air. No body hit the floor with a convenient thud. No one shrieked for a doctor or fumbled a telephone with wet fingers. The clock on Wolfe's wall struck 12, the way it always does, measured, dignified, a little contemptuous of human excitement, as if it were announcing nothing more dramatic than the end of one hour and the beginning of another, which, for once, was a lie. In Nero Wolfe's office, the atmosphere was thick with the kind of tension that lingers after danger has passed. But before anyone believes it, it is not the tension of immediate threat. It is the tension of realization, the belated understanding that you nearly walked into a room and did not walk out. Calvin Shaw sat in one of the red leather chairs facing Wolfe's desk. He sat stiffly, too large for the chair and too uncertain of himself to rearrange it. His overcoat lay folded on the chair beside him, and his hat rested on his knee like a prop he did not know what to do with. He had the posture of a man forcing himself to remain upright, because if he leaned back, he might fall into something darker. His hands were spread on his knees, fingers splayed, as if he were anchoring himself in flesh and bone. Earlier that night, those hands had signed contracts and commanded rooms. Now they looked like any other man's hands, capable of shaking, capable of betraying fear. Inspector Kramer stood at Wolfe's desk. Hat off. Coat still on because he never trusts comfort while a case is unresolved. The two uniforms had already gone with Finch, and the brownstone felt less like a police station now, and more like what it always is, Wolfe's domain. Fritz moved quietly in the background, collecting cups and restoring the small, civilized order that crime so rudely disrupts. He did it with the calm of a man who has seen too many nights declared special by foolish people. The green-wrapped package was no longer in my hands. It sat, by Wolfe's insistence and Kramer's grudging cooperation, sealed inside a heavy evidence envelope, with tape across the flap. It looked harmless now, paper within paper, until you remembered what it had almost accomplished, without ever being opened. Wolfe sat behind his desk as if he had never moved from that position in his life. His hands were folded over his stomach, his eyes half-lidded, his face composed in the way it always is when he has been proven correct. If there was satisfaction in him, it was not the emotional kind. It was the satisfaction of an equation balanced. The clock's final chime faded. Silence settled. Then Kramer, who cannot endure silence unless he is asleep, cleared his throat with a grunt. "Well," he said, voice rough and irritated, "I'll be damned. A murder that didn't have the decency to happen." Wolfe's eyelids lifted slightly, like the slow opening of a theater curtain. "On the contrary," he said, "it happened precisely as intended until we prevented its completion." Kramer made a face. "You and your definitions. They matter," Wolfe replied coolly, "especially when the absence of blood encourages complacency." Kramer glared at him. "Don't tell me about complacency. I had 2 squads out in a snowstorm because you said there was a murder in progress. And what do I find? A rich man alive. A gift, seemingly harmless box in an envelope, and a banker in handcuffs." "A financier," Wolfe corrected. Kramer's nostrils flared. "Whatever. Finch is a rat, and you know it." "Yes," Wolfe said, "and now he is also evidence." Shaw shifted in his chair, the first movement he'd made in several minutes. He looked at Wolfe, then at me, then at Kramer, as if he were trying to assemble his understanding out of pieces that didn't quite fit. "I suppose," Shaw said slowly, his voice low and not as confident as it had been at his own dinner table, "I should thank you." Wolfe regarded him as if Shaw had offered him a badly cooked dish. "That is unnecessary," Wolfe said. "Gratitude implies benevolence. I acted to prevent disorder." Shaw's mouth twitched. "Still," he said, and the word carried a bitterness he couldn't hide, "I'm alive." "Yes," Wolfe agreed. "You are." I leaned against the edge of Wolfe's desk, feeling the fatigue settle into my bones now that it had permission. My coat was still damp at the cuffs from snow. My throat was raw from talking too much and not drinking enough. I could have used one of Fritz's miracles in a cup, but there was business left. Kramer looked at me and jabbed his chin. "Goodwin," he said, "you look disappointed." "Not disappointed," I said, "just cold, and vaguely insulted." "Insulted," he barked. "I was promised a dramatic climax," I said. "Instead I got a man who nearly killed himself without the courtesy to commit to it." Kramer's mouth twisted into something that might have been amusement if his face were capable of it. "This ain't the theater." "No," I agreed. "If it were, you'd have better lines." Kramer ignored that. He turned back to Shaw, and his tone shifted into the professional growl of the law. "You," he said, "are going to answer questions, a lot of questions." Shaw stared at him. "About what?" he asked, and there was a brittle edge to it. "About things I didn't do." Kramer's eyes narrowed. "About things you did," he said, "and things you thought you got away with. That package, whether you opened it or not, doesn't disappear just because you didn't read the papers." Shaw swallowed. "I know," he said. "It came out like an admission squeezed from a man who hates being squeezed." Wolfe spoke softly, and the softness made it sharper. "Inspector," he said, "do not assume the law's appetite will diminish because tonight's death did not occur." Kramer stared at him. "You think I don't know that?" "I think," Wolfe said, "you sometimes prefer a corpse because it makes men cooperative." Kramer's face darkened. "Watch it, Wolfe." Wolfe's expression didn't change. "I am watching you," he said. "Always." That ended that particular exchange. Kramer shifted his weight and glanced toward the door as if considering escape. Shaw rubbed a hand over his face. The motion made him look suddenly older. "They thought I'd choose control," he said quietly. The words were not addressed to anyone in particular, which is how you can tell they are true. "They were right," Kramer frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Shaw said, voice rough, "they knew me. They knew I wouldn't sit in a courtroom while people who hate me explained why I should rot." Kramer gave a short laugh without humor. "So instead you'd take the quick way out?" Shaw's eyes flashed. "It wasn't about quick," he swallowed. "It was about mine, my ending, my decision. If the world was going to take everything else, it wasn't going to take that." Wolfe regarded him. "That is the weakness of proud men," Wolfe said. They believe the final act must be authored. They do not notice when someone else has written the script. Shaw's gaze snapped to Wolfe. You think Finch wrote it? No, Wolfe said. Finch assisted. He is too timid to create. He is, however, quite capable of collaboration, especially when he believes he will never be held accountable. Kramer snorted. He will now. Yes, Wolfe agreed. He will. At the mention of Finch, Shaw's face hardened. He sat at my table, Shaw said, voice low. He smiled. He drank my brandy, and all along he was helping someone. His jaw clenched. He thought I deserved it. Kramer's voice was flat. Maybe you do. Shaw's head jerked up for a second. The old Shaw flashed, the man who would have crushed that remark under a glare. But then the flash died, because the old Shaw had almost ended himself rather than face judgment, and he knew it. I'm not asking for sympathy, Shaw said. I'm asking for reality. If those papers ever surfaced, I'd have dragged half the city down with me trying to stay afloat. Finch knew that. He told himself he was doing a public service. And then, Wolfe said, his nerve failed him. Kramer tapped the desk lightly with 2 fingers, a habit of his when he wants to keep the conversation on rails. Let's talk about nerve, he said. Finch comes running to you, Wolfe, claims he wants to stop it, but he waits till the last minute. Why? Wolfe's eyes were cold. Because he did not want to stop it, Wolfe said. He wanted to survive it. Shaw stared. He wanted me dead, he whispered, as if hearing the simple truth was harder than all the details. Yes, Wolfe said. And then, when he imagined the scrutiny that would follow, he wished to be seen as the man who tried. Kramer grunted. That's why I hate confessions, he said. Half of them are just men trying to negotiate for mercy. Wolfe's mouth curled slightly. Mercy is not your currency, he said. Evidence is. Kramer glanced at the evidence envelope. We'll open it at the precinct, he said. No, Wolfe said immediately. Kramer's brows rose. Excuse me, you will open it, Wolfe said. With proper witnesses and documentation, but you will do it now. In your office, Kramer demanded. In my presence, Wolfe said. And Mr. Shaw's, the contents concern him, and I prefer there be no later claims of substitution or contamination. Kramer's eyes narrowed. You think I'd tamper with evidence? I think, Wolfe said, you sometimes allow impatience to replace procedure. Tonight, procedure matters. Kramer looked like he wanted to argue. But Fritz chose that moment to enter with a tray, coffee for Wolfe, and astonishingly, for Kramer as well. Fritz placed the cups with quiet certainty, as if the presence of police did not alter the dignity of refreshment. Kramer stared at the cup, then at Fritz, then accepted it with a grunt. Fritz withdrew. Wolfe sipped his coffee, then set the cup down with care. You will open it, he repeated. And catalogue the contents, Archie, you will witness. And Shaw, I said. Yes, Wolfe said. Mr. Shaw should see what nearly persuaded him to die. Shaw's throat worked. I don't want to, he murmured. That is irrelevant, Wolfe replied. Kramer made a sound of irritation, but pulled the envelope toward him. He took out a small knife, his own because Kramer distrusts other people's tools, and slit the tape. His movements were careful now, more careful than he likes to admit he can be. He slid the contents out, a bundle of papers, neatly arranged, clipped together. No handwriting, typed pages. Copies of contracts, copies of letters, photographs of signatures, bank records, the kind of paper that doesn't bleed, but kills anyway. Kramer flipped through them, his face darkening with each page. Well, he muttered, I'll be damned. Shaw leaned forward involuntarily. His eyes scanned the top page, then the next. His face drained of color. His lips parted slightly, as if he were tasting something bitter. These are, he whispered. Real, Kramer said. Shaw's hands tightened on the arms of the chair. I destroyed some of these, he said hoarsely. I saw them burned. Wolfe's voice was calm. You saw paper burned, he said. Not knowledge. Kramer looked up from the documents. This is enough to bury him, he said, jerking his chin toward Shaw. then adding, and enough to bury Finch too, if he touched any of it. He did, Wolfe said. How do you know? Kramer demanded. Wolfe's eyes met his. Because Finch knew the method, Wolfe said. He knew it was not poison, not a gun, but proof delivered at the precise moment. Solitude would make it fatal. He described it as clarifying. That is the language of a man who has handled the trap. Kramer grunted again, reluctant but convinced. We'll find fingerprints, he said automatically, then snorted at himself. If there are any left. There will be other traces, Wolfe said. Telephone records, deliveries. The procurement of these copies. People talk when they believe themselves safe. Finch's confession will make them nervous. Shaw sat back slowly, eyes unfocused. So this was waiting, he said. All this time. Yes, Wolfe replied. Shaw's voice came out thin. And if I had opened it alone, you would have done what they intended, Wolfe said. You would have ensured their convenience. Kramer slammed the papers back into the envelope with more force than necessary, and stood. All right, he snapped. That's enough holiday. Cheer for me, Shaw. You're coming downtown later this morning. Finch is already in a cell, and Wolfe, he pointed at Wolfe, with the cup still in his hand. Don't start thinking this makes you Santa Claus. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Do not insult me, he said. Kramer's mouth twisted. Wouldn't dream of it. He turned toward Shaw. Get your coat, my guys will take you home. You don't move without us knowing where you are. Shaw nodded once, subdued. I understand, he said. Kramer paused at the door, then glanced back at him. His tone softened by a fraction, which for Kramer is a remarkable act of generosity. Don't waste the second act, he said. Most men don't get one. Shaw didn't answer, but his fingers tightened around his hat again. When they left, Kramer, Shaw, and the uniform who had returned to escort them, the brownstone, quiet, settled back into place, like a blanket being pulled up. Fritz's footsteps moved in the kitchen again, steady and unconcerned. The city outside was hushed by snow, and from far away came the faint sound of bells welcoming Christmas with more optimism than the night deserved. I exhaled and realized I had been holding my breath since Alder Street. Wolfe sat in his chair and closed his eyes, as if the affair had been a minor inconvenience. Well, I said, because silence irritates me even more than it irritates Kramer. No corpse, no headlines, no final tableau with everyone gasping. Wolfe opened one eye. Do you regret that? From a professional standpoint, I said. Number from a narrative standpoint a little? It lacks punch. Wolfe snorted softly. Reality is not obligated to entertain you, Archie. It would do a terrible job if it tried, I said. Wolfe's eye narrowed. Prevention, he said, almost to himself, is a vulgar triumph. It leaves nothing to admire. But it leaves people breathing, I pointed out. Yes, Wolfe conceded, an incidental benefit. I looked at the clock again. Past midnight now, Christmas Day had arrived without fanfare. Outside, the snow continued to fall, steady and patient, covering footprints, smoothing the city into a clean lie. A crime had been planned with intelligence and care. A death had been shaped into something that would look like weakness instead of murder. The killer, or killers, had counted on tradition, comfort, and a man's pride to do the final work for them. And they had almost been right, almost. Somewhere downtown, Harold Finch sat under harsh lights, learning that confession does not erase intention. Somewhere else, Calvin Shaw lay awake, learning that survival can be more uncomfortable than death. And here, in a warm brownstone on West 35th Street, Nero Wolfe returned to his chair with the calm satisfaction of a man who had restored order and felt no obligation to call it mercy. Christmas was ruined. Lives were spared. The snow kept falling, quiet, persistent, covering a crime that never quite happened, but came close enough to leave a shadow anyway. In New York, that is about as peaceful an ending as one ever gets.